When a single father's desperate choice collides with a billionaire's hidden identity, one scratched car becomes the beginning of an impossible love story. What would you do if honesty cost you everything you couldn't afford to lose? Daniel Harper faced that choice in a grocery store parking lot, and what happened next changed 3 lives forever. This is a story about courage, secrets, and the unexpected connections that remind us we're all just human beneath the surface. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The fluorescent lights of Save Mart grocery store flickered against the darkening October sky as Daniel Harper gripped the steering wheel of his 2004 Ford F-150 with hands that hadn't stopped shaking for the past 10 minutes. The truck's engine rumbled beneath him, that familiar, tired sound that reminded him of everything held together by duct tape and prayer in his life. He could see Maya through the rear-view mirror, her small 6-year-old frame perched on the edge of the truck bed, swinging her legs and humming something he couldn't quite make out. She was waiting, patient as always, too patient for a child her age. Daniel had exactly $47 in his checking account. He knew this because he'd checked it 3 times that morning before deciding whether he could afford the extra box of granola bars Maya loved, the ones with chocolate chips. In the end, he'd bought them anyway, along with pasta, canned sauce, chicken breasts on sale, and a gallon of milk. The total had come to $32.16. That left him $14.84 until Friday's paycheck from the auto shop, $14.84 to cover gas, Maya's school lunch account that was running dangerously low, and the unpredictable chaos that life seemed to specialize in throwing at single fathers who were barely treading water. He shifted the truck into reverse, checking his mirrors carefully. The parking lot was a nightmare, a Saturday afternoon free-for-all where shopping carts roamed like tumbleweeds and distracted drivers treated lanes like suggestions rather than rules. His truck didn't have a backup camera. It barely had functioning air conditioning. But it ran, and in Daniel's world, that was enough. The space behind him looked clear. He pressed the gas gently, the truck rolling backward with its characteristic groan of protest. Daniel's attention split between the rear-view mirror, the side mirrors, and the mental calculation of whether he had enough gas to make it through the week. He was so focused on the narrow gap between a minivan and a badly parked SUV that he didn't see it. Not until he felt it. The sickening scrape of metal on metal, brief but unmistakable, sent ice water through Daniel's veins. His foot slammed on the brake. For 3 full seconds, he sat frozen, hoping desperately that the sound had come from somewhere else, that someone else had made the mistake that was currently draining the blood from his face. But he knew better. "Daddy?" Maya's voice drifted from outside the truck, small and worried. What was that sound? Daniel forced himself to breathe, forced himself to put the truck in park, forced himself to open the door and step out into the cool autumn air that suddenly felt too thin to fill his lungs properly. The silver sedan gleamed in the late afternoon sun like an accusation. It was parked perfectly within its lines, of course it was. A luxury vehicle that probably cost more than Daniel had earned in the past 3 years combined. And there, along the rear passenger side panel, was a fresh scratch running nearly 18 inches long, the silver paint scraped away to reveal the dark primer underneath. Daniel's stomach dropped straight through the asphalt. "Is the car okay, Daddy?" Maya had hopped down from the truck bed and was standing beside him now, her small hand finding his. Her brown eyes, so much like her mother's, were wide with concern. Not for the car, Daniel knew, but for him. Maya had become an expert at reading the tension in her father's shoulders, the tightness around his eyes that meant money problems were about to get worse. "I don't know, sweetheart." Daniel's voice came out rougher than he intended. He knelt down, getting eye level with his daughter, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack his face. "Why don't you go sit on that bench right over there, okay? Just for a minute while Daddy figures this out." Maya nodded solemnly and walked to the nearby bench, settling onto it with her hands folded in her lap, like a miniature adult waiting in a doctor's office. The sight of her, so small, so serious, so accustomed to waiting while her father dealt with one crisis after another, made Daniel's chest physically ache. He turned back to the sedan, his mind racing through calculations that were making him dizzy. The scratch was bad, really bad. This wasn't something he could buff out with compound and hope for the best. This would need professional repair, maybe even panel replacement depending on how deep the damage went. He was looking at $500. Easy. Maybe more if the owner insisted on a dealership repair. $500 might as well have been $5 million. Daniel pulled out his phone with trembling hands, opening the camera to document the damage. He took several photos from different angles, then moved to capture his truck's position, the license plate of the sedan, a vanity plate that read VAUGN1, and the general scene. Some distant, practical part of his brain was going through the motions of what responsible people did in these situations. Then he noticed something that made his stomach clench even tighter. There was no visible damage to his truck. The old F-150's rubber bumper had taken the impact without a scratch. Only the sedan showed evidence of contact, which meant, technically, if Daniel got back in his truck and drove away right now, there would be no way to trace this back to him. The parking lot cameras, if they even worked, were pointed at the store entrance, not this far corner of the lot. No witnesses had stopped or called out. Maya was the only person who had seen anything, and she was 6. He could leave. The thought appeared in his mind like a poisonous flower, beautiful and terrible. He could get in the truck, drive away, and no one would ever know. That $500 or more could stay in his imagination instead of becoming another debt he couldn't pay. Maya's school lunch account could stay funded. The gas tank could get filled. The electricity bill that was already 2 weeks overdue could get paid before the shutoff notice turned into actual darkness. Daniel looked at the bench where Maya sat swinging her legs, then back at the scratched sedan. His hands were still shaking. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. What kind of man walked away from a mistake just because no one was watching? What kind of father showed his daughter that honesty was conditional, something you practiced only when it was convenient or when you might get caught? But what kind of father chose principle over his child's basic needs? What good was integrity if it meant Maya went hungry or cold or without? The internal war lasted maybe 15 seconds, though it felt like hours. In the end, it wasn't nobility that decided it. It wasn't even really a decision at all. Daniel simply knew, with the same certainty he knew his own name, that he couldn't drive away. Not because he was particularly virtuous, but because he'd looked Maya in the eye too many times and told her that doing the right thing mattered. That their family might not have much, but they had their word. That Harpers didn't lie, didn't cheat, didn't take the easy way out when the easy way meant compromising who they were. Those hadn't just been pretty words meant to make his daughter feel better about their situation. They were supposed to mean something. Daniel walked back to his truck and retrieved the pen he kept in the cup holder, a cheap ballpoint from the auto shop, and the receipt from their grocery shopping. His hand trembled as he wrote, "I'm so sorry. I scratched your car while backing out. It was completely my fault. I take full responsibility and will pay for all repairs. Please call me to arrange payment. Daniel Harper." He added his phone number below his name, then read it over 3 times, his heart sinking deeper with each word. Every letter felt like he was writing his own financial death sentence, but he folded the receipt carefully and walked to the sedan's windshield. Up close, the vehicle was even more intimidating. A late-model luxury import with leather interior visible through the tinted windows, a dashboard that looked like something from a spaceship, and that new car smell still faintly perceptible even from outside. The owner of this car would not be sympathetic to a struggling single father's budget constraints. Daniel slipped the receipt under the windshield wiper, pressing it down to make sure it wouldn't blow away. Then he stood there for a moment, staring at his own shaking handwriting, feeling like he'd just volunteered to step off a cliff. "Daddy, are we going home now?" Maya had appeared beside him again, her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She looked tired. They'd been up since 6 that morning because Daniel's Saturday shift at the shop started at 7, and he couldn't afford a babysitter. Maya had spent 5 hours in the shop's break room, coloring and reading the same 3 books over and over, while her father rotated tires and changed oil and pretended he didn't notice the other mechanics' pitying looks. "Yeah, sweetheart, we're going home." Daniel took her hand and walked back to the truck, lifting Maya into the passenger seat and making sure her seatbelt was secure. His movements felt mechanical, disconnected. Part of him was still standing by that silver sedan, staring at the receipt and trying to figure out how he was going to explain to Maya why they couldn't buy new shoes this month, or next month, or possibly any month in the near future. He climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, not starting the engine. "Daddy?" Maya's voice was soft, uncertain. "Are you sad?" Daniel looked at his daughter, really looked at her. She was wearing the jacket from last year that was already getting too small, her wrists poking out from the sleeves. Her jeans had a patch on one knee where he'd sewn up a tear because buying new ones wasn't in the budget. Her sneakers were clean but worn, the soles starting to separate in one corner where he'd applied super glue to buy another month of wear. She was beautiful, smart, kind. Everything good that had ever happened to him was sitting in that passenger seat, looking at him with concern that no 6-year-old should have to carry for their parent. No, baby. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand. I'm not sad. I'm proud. Of what? Of us. He managed a real smile this time, small but genuine. Of doing the right thing even when it's hard. That matters, Maya. That's what being a Harper means. She nodded seriously, as if he'd just explained something profound about the universe, then pulled out the small toy car she'd brought from home, a red convertible she'd gotten from a thrift store birthday party 3 months ago. She began rolling it along the dashboard, making soft vroom sounds, already moving on with the resilience of childhood. Daniel started the truck and began the drive back to their apartment, a second-floor unit in a complex that had seen better decades. His phone sat on the center console between them, silent for now, but loaded with inevitable consequences. He tried not to think about what would happen when it rang, tried not to calculate and recalculate numbers that wouldn't add up no matter how many times he ran them through his head. The drive took 20 minutes. By the time Daniel pulled into their assigned parking spot, number 247, right next to the dumpster that was always overflowing, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if he'd had the mental space to appreciate them. "Can I play outside for a little bit?" Maya asked as they climbed the exterior stairs to their apartment. A few other kids from the complex were riding bikes in the parking lot, their laughter echoing off the buildings. Daniel hesitated. He needed to start dinner, spaghetti tonight, the cheap kind that came in the box with powdered cheese, and he had a load of laundry that desperately needed to be done. But Maya had been cooped up all day, first in the break room and then in the truck, and the joy on her face at the prospect of 30 minutes of normalcy made the decision for him. 30 minutes, he said, unlocking the apartment door. "Then inside for dinner and bath, okay?" "Okay." Maya dropped her backpack just inside the door and thundered back down the stairs. Her earlier fatigue evaporated at the promise of playtime. Daniel watched her go, then stepped into their apartment and closed the door behind him. The living room was small, a couch he'd gotten from Craigslist, a coffee table that wobbled, a TV that still had a VCR built in. But it was clean. Daniel made sure of that. The dishes were done, the floor vacuumed, Maya's toys organized in their designated bin. They might be poor, but they didn't have to live in chaos. He set the grocery bags on the kitchen counter and began putting things away, his movements automatic while his mind spun in anxious circles. The phone sat in his pocket like a ticking bomb. Every time it vibrated, usually just spam calls or texts from the auto shop, his heart would lurch. But as the evening progressed, no call came. Daniel made dinner, called Maya inside right at the 30-minute mark, and they ate spaghetti at their small kitchen table while Maya told him an elaborate story about the bike-riding adventures she'd just had. He gave her a bath, helped her into her pajamas, also getting too small, and read her 3 chapters of the library book they were working through. "Daddy?" Maya asked as he tucked her into bed, her room small but painted a cheerful yellow that Daniel had done himself when they first moved in. "Is the person with the fancy car going to be very mad?" Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. But that's okay. We did the right thing by being honest, and sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but it's still right. Like when I told Mrs. Peterson I broke the pencil sharpener even though no one saw me do it. Exactly like that." Daniel smiled, remembering the phone call from Maya's teacher, praising his daughter's honesty. "You could have stayed quiet and no one would have known it was you, but you told the truth anyway because that's who you are. I'm raising you to be brave, Maya. Brave enough to do right even when it costs you something." Maya considered this, her small face serious in the glow of her nightlight. Even when it costs a lot? Even then. She seemed satisfied with this answer and snuggled deeper into her blankets. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby girl. More than anything in this whole world." Daniel kissed her forehead and turned off the overhead light, leaving only the nightlight glowing softly in the corner. He pulled her door mostly closed. She didn't like it completely shut, and walked back to the living room where he collapsed on the couch with an exhaustion that went bone deep. It was only 8:30. He should do the laundry, should prep his lunch for tomorrow's shift, should review the budget and figure out where he could squeeze a few more dollars from expenses that were already cut to the absolute minimum. Instead, he just sat there in the quiet apartment, staring at his phone and waiting for the call that would confirm exactly how bad things were about to get. The call didn't come that night, or the next day, or the day after that. By Wednesday, Daniel had started to wonder if maybe the note had blown away, if maybe the owner hadn't seen it, or had seen the scratch and decided it wasn't worth pursuing, or had insurance that would cover it without tracking down the culprit. It was a nice fantasy. Daniel knew better than to believe it, but the longer the silence stretched, the more a small, desperate hope began to grow in his chest. He was rotating tires on a Honda Civic at the shop when his phone finally rang on Thursday afternoon. The number was local but unfamiliar. Daniel's hands went immediately slick with sweat as he wiped them on a rag and answered. "Hello? Is this Daniel Harper?" The voice was female, professional, with an accent he couldn't quite place. British maybe, but softened by years of living elsewhere. "Yes, this is Daniel. Mr. Harper, this is Isabella Vaughn. I believe you left a note on my car this past Saturday. Regarding some damage?" Daniel's knees actually went weak. He leaned against the Civic for support, his mind racing. Yes, I did. I'm so sorry about that. It was completely my fault. I take full responsibility." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Isabella Vaughn spoke again, her tone was measured, giving nothing away. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Harper. The note was unexpected. Most people in that situation would have simply driven away." "I considered it," Daniel admitted, because there seemed no point in pretending otherwise. "But that's not who I am. I want to make this right. I know the damage is significant. I'd like to arrange payment for the repairs." Another pause. Daniel could hear papers rustling in the background, perhaps Isabella reviewing an estimate from a body shop. His stomach churned. "Mr. Harper, I've had the car assessed. The damage is indeed significant. We're looking at approximately $1,800 for proper repair." The number hit Daniel like a physical blow. 1,800. He'd been hoping for 500, preparing himself for 800, but 1,800 might as well have been 18 million. There was no universe in which he had access to that kind of money. His savings account held exactly $212. His emergency fund that had taken him 8 months to build and that he'd been so proud of until about 30 seconds ago. "I understand," Daniel managed to say, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. I don't have that amount available immediately, but I can set up a payment plan. I can pay you weekly or monthly, whatever works best. I give you my word that you'll be paid in full. It might take some time, but you will be paid." He was already doing math in his head. If he could squeeze $100 a month from his budget, and he had no idea where that $100 would come from, he'd be paying this off for a year and a half. More probably, because there was no way he could maintain that pace without something breaking. The truck would need repairs. Maya would need things. Life would keep happening regardless of his payment obligations. "Mr. Harper." Isabella's voice had shifted slightly, though Daniel couldn't read the emotion behind it. "I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement." Daniel's heart hammered. Was she going to demand more up front? Take him to small claims court? He had no idea what his options were, no experience with this kind of situation. "What kind of arrangement?" "I understand you work in automotive repair?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm a mechanic at Morrison's Auto Shop." "Then here's my proposal. Rather than paying for the repairs through a body shop, I'd like you to handle the work yourself. You fix the damage you caused, using your own skills. I'll provide the materials, the paint, the supplies, whatever you need. Your labor covers the cost of the repair." Daniel blinked, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're a mechanic. I assume you're capable of body work, or know someone who is. I'm offering you the opportunity to repair the damage personally, rather than paying cash you clearly don't have readily available." It was such an unexpected offer that Daniel's mind went momentarily blank. He could do the work. Body repair wasn't his specialty. He was better with engines and systems, but he'd done enough over the years to handle a job like this. It would take time, probably 2 full weekends of work to do it right, but it was absolutely within his capabilities. More importantly, it would cost him labor instead of money he didn't have. Why would you offer that? The question came out before Daniel could stop it. You don't know me. You don't know if I'm any good. Isabella laughed, a sound that was surprisingly warm. Mr. Harper, you left a note taking responsibility for damage you could have easily escaped. That tells me more about your character than any resume could. I'm willing to take a chance that someone with that kind of integrity will treat the repair with the same level of responsibility. Daniel's throat felt tight. Yes, I can do that. I can absolutely do that. When would you want me to start? Are you available this Saturday? Yes, ma'am. Come to my address around 9 in the morning. I'll text you the details. Isabella paused, and when she spoke again, something in her voice had softened further. And Mr. Harper? Bring your daughter. I assume childcare might be a challenge on a weekend. Daniel's eyes actually stung. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his composure. That's very kind of you. Thank you. I'll see you Saturday, Mr. Harper. The call ended, and Daniel stood there in the garage bay, still holding the phone, feeling like he'd just been granted a reprieve from a death sentence. Around him, the shop continued its normal rhythm, air tools hissing, radio playing classic rock, other mechanics shouting good-natured insults at each other across the floor. You good, Harper? That was Jenkins, the senior mechanic who'd been at Morrison's longer than Daniel had been alive. You look like you've seen a ghost. Yeah. Daniel pocketed his phone and returned to the Civic, his hands steadier now. Yeah, I'm good. Just really good, actually. For the first time in days, the weight on his chest had lifted slightly. He still didn't understand why this Isabella Vaughn had offered him such a generous alternative, but he wasn't going to question his good fortune. He would do the job, do it perfectly, and prove that her faith in him wasn't misplaced. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. The address Isabella Vaughn had texted him led Daniel to a neighborhood he'd driven through before but never had reason to stop in. The houses here didn't just have yards, they had grounds. Professionally landscaped, with gates and long driveways and the kind of architectural presence that suggested the word estate rather than home. Daniel's truck looked deeply out of place as he turned onto Oakmont Drive, the old F-150 rattling past pristine mailboxes and perfectly trimmed hedges. Maya was in the passenger seat, her eyes wide as she took in the surroundings. Daddy, these houses are like castles, she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow offend the neighborhood itself. They're just houses, sweetheart. Bigger than ours, but still just places where people live. He was trying to sound casual, but his own heart was beating faster as he checked the address again. 2847 Oakmont Drive. He was looking for a silver sedan, presumably parked somewhere visible. What he found instead was a sprawling contemporary home set back from the street, all glass and clean lines and expensive subtlety. The driveway curved through manicured landscaping, and there, parked near a 3-car garage, was the silver sedan he'd scratched. Daniel pulled in slowly, his truck sounding particularly loud and rough in this quiet enclave of wealth. He parked well away from any other vehicles and killed the engine, sitting for a moment to collect himself. Is this where the fancy car lady lives? Maya asked. Yeah, baby, this is it. Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to his daughter. Remember what we talked about. Be polite, be respectful, and stay where I can see you, okay? Okay, Daddy. They climbed out of the truck and Daniel grabbed his toolbox from the bed, a battered red metal box that had been his father's, filled with tools he'd accumulated over years of work. It wasn't much compared to the professional setups at the shop, but it was his, and every tool in it had earned its place through regular use. Before they could knock on the front door, it opened. The woman who stepped out was not what Daniel had expected, though he wasn't entirely sure what he had expected. Isabella Vaughn was perhaps in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, and features that suggested Mediterranean heritage. She was wearing jeans and a simple white blouse, clothes that probably cost more than Daniel's entire wardrobe, but didn't advertise the fact. What struck him most was her smile. It was genuine, reaching her eyes, and it made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the obvious, expensive grooming. Mr. Harper. She extended her hand as she approached. Isabella Vaughn, thank you for coming. Daniel shook her hand, acutely aware of the motor oil that never quite washed completely away from under his fingernails. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Ms. Vaughn. I promise I'll do the work right. I have no doubt. Isabella's gaze shifted to Maya, and her smile widened. And you must be Maya. Your father mentioned you on the phone. Maya, usually shy around strangers, managed a small smile. Hi. I thought you might like some breakfast while your father works. Do you like pancakes? Maya's eyes lit up, and she looked to Daniel for permission. He nodded, struck again by this woman's unexpected kindness. That would be wonderful, thank you. Perfect. Maya, why don't you come with me? We'll leave your father to assess the damage. Isabella offered her hand to Maya, who hesitated only a moment before taking it. Daniel watched them walk toward the house, his daughter already chattering about something, Isabella listening with what appeared to be genuine interest. Then he was alone with the sedan and his toolbox, and the reality of what he'd agreed to do settled over him. The scratch looked even worse in proper daylight. Daniel knelt beside the vehicle, running his fingers along the damage, assessing depth and spread. It was repairable, absolutely, but it would require careful work. Sanding, primer, paint matching, clear coat, blending to make sure the repair was invisible against the surrounding panel. He was still examining the damage when Isabella returned, carrying a bottle of water that she offered to him. Thank you. Daniel accepted it gratefully. The morning was already warm, and he could feel sweat beginning to form along his collar. How bad is it? Isabella asked, gesturing to the scratch. It's manageable. The damage is mostly superficial. Didn't get down to bare metal, which is good. I'll need to sand it carefully, get the surface absolutely smooth, then build it back up with primer and paint. The paint matching is going to be the tricky part. I'll need to get the exact code from your vehicle specs to make sure the color is perfect. Isabella watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You sound like you know what you're doing. Body work isn't my main specialty, but I've done enough of it over the years. I give you my word, Ms. Vaughn. When I'm done, you won't be able to tell there was ever any damage. Please, call me Isabella. She gestured toward the house. I've set up a space in the garage where you can work. Better shade, and I've got a radio you can use if you want. Maya is inside demolishing a stack of pancakes. She's welcome to stay in the house while you work, if that's easier. Daniel felt that same tightness in his throat from the phone call. That's very generous of you. Are you sure? Mr. Harper, Daniel, I'm not doing this out of pure altruism. You're solving a problem for me without involving insurance or expensive body shops. This arrangement benefits both of us. Isabella paused, her expression softening. But yes, I'm also sure. Your daughter seems delightful, and my house is quite large and quite empty most days. The company is welcome. There was something in the way she said it, quite large and quite empty, that suggested a story beneath the surface. But it wasn't Daniel's place to ask, so he simply nodded. Thank you. I really appreciate this. You're very welcome. Now let me show you the garage setup, and then I'll get out of your hair. I imagine you'd like to get started. Isabella led him to the garage, which was cleaner than most people's living rooms. There was indeed a workspace set up, a sturdy table, good lighting, and more than enough space to work comfortably. She showed him where she'd stored the supplies he might need, sandpaper and various grits, polishing compound, clean rags, all quality materials that would make the job significantly easier. If you need anything else, just come inside and ask, Isabella said. The front door is open. Then she left him to his work, and Daniel stood alone in the immaculate garage, still trying to process how a mistake that should have ruined him had somehow transformed into this strange kindness from a complete stranger. He got to work. The sanding alone took nearly 3 hours. Daniel worked with meticulous care, removing the damaged paint layer by layer, constantly checking his progress, making sure the surface was perfectly smooth before moving to the next finer grit. It was meditative work, the kind that let his mind quiet and focus on the simple tactile feedback of sandpaper against metal. Around noon, Maya appeared in the garage doorway. Daddy, Ms. Isabella says lunch is ready if you want to take a break. Daniel looked up from his work, surprised at how much time had passed. His back ached from kneeling, and his arms were tired from the repetitive motion, but he'd made good progress. The damaged area was properly prepped now, ready for primer once he finished one more careful cleaning. "Tell her I'll be there in just a minute, okay?" Maya nodded and disappeared back into the house. Daniel spent a few more minutes cleaning the work area, then washed his hands thoroughly at the garage sink before heading inside. The interior of Isabella's home was as impressive as the exterior suggested. High ceilings, expansive windows, furniture that looked like art installations. But what struck Daniel more than the obvious wealth was how lived in it felt. There were books everywhere, stacked on tables and filling built-in shelves. Framed photographs of places rather than people. A pair of running shoes kicked off near the door. Small signs of actual habitation rather than the sterile perfection he'd expected. He found Isabella and Maya in the kitchen, which could have comfortably fit Daniel's entire apartment inside it. They were sitting at a large island, and Maya was explaining something elaborate involving her toy cars, while Isabella listened with what appeared to be genuine interest. "I hope sandwiches are all right," Isabella said when she noticed Daniel. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can handle the basics." "Sandwiches are perfect. You really didn't have to do this." "Nonsense. You've been working for hours. The least I can do is feed you both." Lunch was turkey sandwiches with what Daniel suspected was very expensive cheese, along with fresh fruit and chips that actually tasted like potatoes rather than salt and grease. They ate at the island, Maya chattering happily about the movie she'd been watching, something involving animated cars that Daniel had seen approximately 800 times, while Isabella asked surprisingly specific questions about the plot points. "Your daughter is quite the storyteller," Isabella said to Daniel during a brief pause in Maya's monologue. "She's been entertaining me all morning with elaborate adventures." "She's got a good imagination," Daniel agreed, feeling pride mix with the ever-present worry about what that imagination would have access to as Maya grew up. He wanted to give her so much more than their current circumstances allowed. After lunch, Daniel returned to the garage while Maya went back to her movie. He applied the first coat of primer, then had to wait for it to dry before assessing and deciding if a second coat was needed. The waiting gave him time to think, which wasn't necessarily a good thing. He still didn't understand Isabella Vaughn. Couldn't quite figure out why a woman who clearly had money to burn had opted for this arrangement, rather than simply taking her car to a professional shop and billing Daniel for it. The generosity didn't make sense. Not in his experience of how the world worked, unless she felt sorry for him. That thought made Daniel's jaw clench. He didn't want pity. Didn't want to be some charity case that made rich people feel good about themselves. He wanted to earn his way, to pay his debts with work rather than being forgiven them out of some misplaced sense of noblesse oblige. But then he remembered the way Isabella had listened to Maya, had treated her like a person rather than an inconvenient accessory to her father's presence. The way she'd set up the workspace with quality materials rather than cheap alternatives. The way she'd offered lunch without making it feel like she was feeding the poor. Maybe it wasn't pity. Maybe it was just decency. The kind of basic human kindness that shouldn't be surprising, but somehow was in a world that had taught Daniel to expect the worst. He was applying the second primer coat when Isabella appeared in the garage again. "How's it coming along?" she asked. "Good. 2 coats of primer should do it. I'll need to let this dry overnight, then tomorrow I can do the color match and paint. Probably need 2 coats of that, then clear coat and blending. I'm thinking I can finish Sunday afternoon if everything goes smoothly." "No rush." Isabella leaned against the workbench, watching him with that same unreadable expression. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" His hand stilled on the spray can. "Sure." "The note you left, you said you had considered driving away. What made you decide to leave it instead?" Daniel set down the spray can and turned to face her properly. It was a fair question, and she deserved an honest answer. "My daughter," he said simply. "I've told Maya over and over that honesty matters, that doing the right thing is what defines us as people. How could I look her in the eye and say those things if I wasn't willing to live them myself, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard?" Isabella nodded slowly, and something in her expression shifted, softened perhaps, or maybe just became more visible. That must be difficult, teaching those values when circumstances don't always reward them. "It is," Daniel admitted. "There are days I wonder if I'm setting her up for disappointment, teaching her to believe in things the world doesn't actually care about. But then I think about what kind of person I want her to become, and I can't imagine raising her any other way, even if it costs me." Even if it costs you $1,800 you don't have? Daniel managed a rueful smile. Yeah, even then. Though I'm grateful you gave me a way to pay that debt with work instead of money. You have no idea how much that means. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those sharp, thoughtful eyes. I think I have some idea, she said finally. You're a good father, Daniel Harper. Maya is lucky to have you. The compliment hit harder than it should have. Daniel wasn't used to hearing that he was doing a good job. Most days felt like barely controlled chaos, like he was one missed bill or sick day away from everything falling apart. To hear someone, especially someone like Isabella, who seemed to have her life so perfectly ordered, acknowledge that he was getting something right made his chest tight. Thank you, he managed. That means a lot. Isabella smiled, pushed off from the workbench, and headed back toward the house. I'll let you finish up. Maya and I are about to start movie number 2 if you're wondering where she is. She's not bothering you? Not at all. As I said, the company is welcome. Then she was gone, leaving Daniel alone with Primer drying on a luxury sedan and thoughts he couldn't quite organize into coherent shape. There was something about Isabella Vaughn that didn't fit the patterns he'd expected. Some quality beneath the obvious wealth and poise that felt human, real. Like maybe underneath their vastly different circumstances, they were both just people trying to navigate a complicated world as best they could. He finished the day's work around 5, cleaned up the garage space meticulously, and went to collect Maya. He found her on a couch that probably cost more than his truck, curled up against cushions the size of her entire body, sound asleep with the credits of some movie rolling on a television screen large enough to show films at a theater. Isabella was reading nearby, curled into an armchair with a book and a cup of tea, looking more relaxed than she had all day. She crashed about 20 minutes ago, Isabella said softly when she noticed Daniel. I didn't want to wake her. I'm sorry. I should have come in sooner. Please don't apologize. It's nice having the house feel less empty. Isabella set aside her book and stood. How did the work go? Good progress. I'll need to come back tomorrow to finish the paint and clear coat. If that's still okay? Of course. Same time? Yes, ma'am. And thank you again for watching Maya, and for lunch, and for all of this. Isabella walked with him to where Maya slept, helping Daniel gently wake his daughter, who was disoriented and sleepy as she stumbled toward the door. Can I ask you something? Daniel said as they reached the entryway. Why did you really offer me this arrangement instead of just going through insurance? Isabella considered the question for a long moment. Because your note told me you were someone who took responsibility for mistakes, and because I thought maybe both of us could use a reminder that the world sometimes offers grace when we least expect it. Was I wrong? No, Daniel said quietly. No, you weren't wrong. They stood there for a moment in the late afternoon light streaming through the windows, two strangers connected by a scratch on a car and a decision to choose honesty over convenience. I'll see you tomorrow, Daniel. Tomorrow. Thank you again, Isabella. He carried a drowsy Maya to the truck and drove home as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, feeling like something important had shifted in his world, even if he couldn't quite name what it was. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything seem sharper, more vivid. Daniel had barely slept, his mind cycling through the steps he needed to complete the repair work. He'd driven to an automotive paint supplier first thing Saturday evening after leaving Isabella's house, using precious gas money to get the exact paint code for her sedan. The color match had to be perfect. Not close, not good enough, but absolutely flawless. Anything less would be a failure of the promise he'd made. Maya was unusually quiet during the drive back to Oakmont Drive, still clutching the stuffed elephant that Isabella had given her yesterday. Daniel hadn't wanted to accept it. Another kindness that felt too large, too generous. But Maya's face had lit up with such pure joy that refusing would have seemed cruel rather than principled. Ms. Isabella has a really big house, Maya observed as they turned onto the familiar street. But she lives there all by herself. Some people like having space, Daniel said, though he'd noticed the same thing. The house had felt simultaneously grand and lonely, like a beautiful stage set waiting for actors who never arrived. I think she's lonely sometimes, Maya said with the blunt perception that children sometimes possessed. She got really happy when I asked her questions. Like nobody asks her questions usually. Daniel glanced at his daughter, surprised. What kind of questions did you ask her? About her favorite color, and her favorite movie, and if she had any pets, and where she learned to make pancakes so good. Maya paused, hugging the elephant closer. She said her favorite color is blue like the ocean, and she's never had a pet, but she always wanted a dog. And she learned to make pancakes from a video on the internet because nobody ever taught her when she was little. There was something achingly sad about that last detail. A grown woman teaching herself to make pancakes from YouTube videos because no one had been there to show her. Daniel filed the information away, adding it to the growing puzzle of Isabella Vaughn that he couldn't quite solve. They pulled into the driveway at exactly 9 o'clock. Isabella must have been watching for them because she opened the front door before Daniel had even killed the engine. She was dressed casually again, this time in dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Her hair was down today, falling in dark waves past her shoulders, and she looked younger somehow, less guarded. "Good morning," she called as they approached. "Maya, I have something I thought you might enjoy if your father doesn't mind. I found some old art supplies in one of my spare rooms, colored pencils, markers, paper. Would you like to draw while your dad works?" Maya's eyes went wide, and she looked up at Daniel with pleading hope. He wanted to say no, wanted to stop accepting things from this woman who kept offering gifts they had no way to repay, but the excitement on his daughter's face won out over his pride. "That would be wonderful," he said. "What do you say, Maya?" "Thank you, Ms. Isabella." Maya's voice was bright with genuine gratitude, the kind that children expressed before the world taught them to be suspicious of generosity. "You're very welcome. Come on, I'll show you where I set everything up." Isabella led Maya inside while Daniel unloaded his supplies from the truck. He'd brought his own paint and clear coat, determined to use his own resources for at least part of this job. The materials he'd purchased had cost him $43 he really couldn't spare, but the alternative, accepting everything from Isabella, had felt like too much. The garage was cooler this morning, and Daniel was grateful. The painting process would be delicate work requiring steady hands and careful attention to temperature and humidity. He'd checked the weather obsessively last night, relieved to find conditions would be ideal. He spent the first hour preparing the surface with obsessive care, wiping down the primed area with tack cloth, checking for any imperfections, making sure everything was absolutely clean. Dust or debris during painting would ruin the finish, creating defects that would be visible even after clear coat. This had to be perfect. Isabella appeared around 10:30, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "How's Maya doing?" he asked. "She's doing great. She's been a little quiet lately, but she's still eating and drinking and playing with her toys. She's been sleeping well, too. She's been a little clingy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy, but that's normal for a baby her age. She's been a little fussy. "How's Maya doing?" he asked. "She's creating what she informs me is a masterpiece of our house surrounded by flowers and a dog that she insists I should adopt." Isabella smiled, that genuine expression that transformed her whole face. She's quite talented for 6 years old, very good with colors. She gets that from her mother, Daniel said without thinking, then felt his chest tighten the way it always did when he mentioned Sarah. My late wife. She was an artist. Nothing professional, just she saw beauty in things, could take anything and make it meaningful. He hadn't talked about Sarah to anyone outside of Maya in over a year. The words had just slipped out, pulled by something in Isabella's presence that felt safe. I'm sorry, Isabella said quietly. That must be incredibly difficult. It's been 3 years. Some days are easier than others. Daniel took a sip of coffee to give his hand something to do. Maya was too young to really remember her, which breaks my heart. But maybe it's easier that way. I don't know. How did you manage losing a partner and suddenly being a single father? It wasn't an idle question. Isabella's tone carried genuine curiosity, as if she actually wanted to understand rather than just offering polite condolences. I didn't manage well at first, Daniel admitted. I fell apart for about 6 months. Barely held down my job, barely took care of Maya the way she needed. My sister came and stayed with us for a while, helped me get back on my feet. Reminded me that Sarah would have kicked my ass for giving up. He managed a small smile at the memory. Eventually, I figured out that grief doesn't go away. You just build your life around it. Make space for it while still moving forward. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. That's very wise. Most people don't figure that out. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Different kind of loss, but yes, I understand about building your life around an absence. Isabella seemed to catch herself, her expression shifting back to something more neutral. Anyway, I didn't mean to intrude on your work. I just wanted to bring you coffee. It's not an intrusion, Daniel said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. I appreciate the company. And the coffee. Isabella smiled and headed back toward the house, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts and the delicate work ahead. He set down the coffee and picked up his paint gun, testing the spray pattern on a piece of cardboard first, adjusting the pressure until it was exactly right. Then he began painting. The work required absolute focus. Daniel applied the base coat in smooth, even strokes, maintaining consistent distance and speed, watching the color build up layer by layer. The paint he'd mixed was a perfect match. He'd been meticulous about getting the ratio exactly right. And as it covered the primed surface, the repair area began to disappear into the surrounding panel. He was applying the second color coat when he heard Maya's laughter drift from somewhere inside the house, followed by Isabella's lower voice saying something he couldn't quite make out. The sound made him pause for just a moment, paint gun hovering in midair. When was the last time he'd heard Maya laugh like that? Pure and unrestrained, the kind of joy that came from feeling completely safe and welcome. Daniel shook off the thought and returned to his work. 2 coats of color, then he'd need to let it dry before applying clear coat. The timing was perfect. If everything went according to plan, he could finish this afternoon and never have to come back. Never have to navigate the strange, complicated feelings that this house and its owner seemed to stir up in him. By noon, the color coats were done and drying. Daniel cleaned his equipment meticulously, then stood back to examine his work. Even without the clear coat, the repair was already nearly invisible. You'd have to know exactly where to look to find any evidence of damage. A small surge of pride went through him. He'd done good work here, professional quality work. Daniel? Isabella's voice came from the doorway. Maya and I made lunch. Well, I made sandwiches and Maya added artistic flair, which apparently means cutting them into triangles and arranging them in a pattern. Will you join us? He should say no. Should maintain some kind of boundary between client and contractor, or whatever this arrangement actually was. But his stomach was growling, and the thought of sitting in the garage alone eating the protein bar he'd brought felt suddenly depressing. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'd like that. Lunch was in the kitchen again. Though this time Isabella had set the island with actual plates instead of paper, and there was a salad alongside the sandwiches that looked like it had come from some expensive restaurant rather than a bag. I cheated on the salad, Isabella admitted when she noticed Daniel looking at it. There's a place nearby that does incredible takeout. I'm not above outsourcing when my skills are lacking. It looks great, Daniel said, and meant it. When was the last time he'd eaten vegetables that hadn't come from a can? Maya had indeed arranged the sandwiches in an elaborate spiral pattern on a large platter, and she explained the artistic significance of each placement while Isabella listened with apparent fascination, and Daniel tried not to laugh at his daughter's serious expression. "Your dad tells me the repair work is going well," Isabella said as they ate. "He says you won't even be able to tell there was damage." "I promise you won't," Daniel said. "I just need to apply clear coat this afternoon and let it cure. The color match is perfect. I'm really pleased with how it turned out." "I have no doubt it's excellent." Isabella paused, her fork hovering over her salad. "Though I have to admit I'll be a little sad when the work is finished. It's been nice having company these past 2 days." The admission was casual, almost throwaway, but Daniel heard the loneliness beneath it. Maya had been right. There was something isolated about Isabella's life, despite all the obvious privilege. "You live here alone?" Daniel asked, then immediately regretted the question. "Sorry, that's too personal. Ignore me." "It's fine. Yes, I live alone. I travel frequently for work, and when I'm home, it's usually just me and too many square feet of empty house." Isabella smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I keep telling myself I should downsize, get something more manageable, but I think I keep hoping the space will eventually feel full." "What kind of work do you do?" Daniel asked. "That has you traveling so much?" Something flickered across Isabella's face. Hesitation, maybe, or calculation. "I'm in automotive," she said carefully. "Management level. It's demanding, but rewarding." The answer felt incomplete somehow, like there was more she wasn't saying, but Daniel didn't push. Everyone was entitled to their privacy, and whatever Isabella did for work was none of his business. "That's how you knew I could do the repair myself," Daniel said. "Being in automotive, you understand what the work involves." "Exactly." Isabella seemed relieved at the redirect. "I've seen enough bodywork to know quality when I see it, and I had a feeling about you." "A feeling?" "That you were someone who took pride in doing things right, who wouldn't cut corners or deliver shoddy work just because you thought you could get away with it." Isabella met his eyes across the table. "I'm glad I trusted that instinct." The weight of her gaze made Daniel's chest feel tight. There was something in the way she looked at him, like she saw past the oil-stained work clothes and beat-up truck to something more, like he was worth paying attention to. "Ms. Isabella?" Maya's voice broke the moment. "Can I show Daddy my picture?" "Of course, sweetheart. It's in the living room. Why don't you go get it?" Maya scrambled down from her stool and ran off, her footsteps echoing through the large house. Isabella and Daniel were left alone in the kitchen, the air between them feeling strangely charged. "She's really taken with you," Daniel said. "I don't think I've seen her warm up to someone this fast since her mother." "The feeling is mutual. She's a remarkable child, Daniel. You should be very proud." "I am. She's the best thing I've ever done." Daniel paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I want to thank you again for this. Not just for letting me work off the debt instead of paying cash, but for the way you've treated Maya. Like she matters. A lot of people in your position wouldn't have even let her come here, much less welcomed her the way you have." "What do you mean, people in my position?" "People with money. People who live in houses like this." Daniel gestured around the expensive kitchen. "In my experience, people with resources don't usually extend kindness to people without them. Not real kindness, anyway. Sometimes pity or charity that makes them feel good, but not this. Not genuine welcome." Isabella's expression had gone very still. "Is that really what you think? That I'm doing this to feel good about myself?" "No," Daniel said quickly, realizing how that had sounded. "No, that's not what I meant. You're different. I'm just saying I don't understand why. Why you're being so generous to complete strangers who scratched your car. Maybe I'm just a decent person who believes in giving people chances. Maybe, or maybe you're lonely and we're a convenient distraction." The words came out harsher than Daniel had intended, his own discomfort making him defensive. Isabella's face went carefully blank, and Daniel immediately regretted speaking. "I'm sorry," he said. "That was out of line. I didn't mean—" "No, you're partially right." Isabella's voice was quiet but steady. "I am lonely. This house is enormous and empty, and most days I come home to silence that echoes. So yes, having you and Maya here has been nice. Is that so terrible? That I enjoyed the company? It's not terrible. I just don't want to be a charity case. You're not, Isabella said firmly. You're a skilled worker doing a job in exchange for debt forgiveness. That's a business arrangement, not charity. Everything else, the meals, the art supplies for Maya, the conversation, that's just two people being decent to each other. Unless you'd prefer I treat this as purely transactional, I can do that if it makes you more comfortable. Daniel heard the hurt beneath her professional tone and felt like an ass. No, I'm sorry. I'm not good at accepting help. I've been on my own for so long, and people usually don't offer without expecting something in return. I'm not used to kindness that doesn't come with strings. There are no strings, Daniel. I promise you that. They looked at each other across the kitchen island, and something shifted in the air between them. An understanding, maybe, or just the acknowledgement that both of them were more complicated than surface appearances suggested. Maya's return with her drawing, an elaborate crayon masterpiece of Isabella's house complete with garden and imaginary dog, broke the tension. Isabella made a huge fuss over the artwork, asking detailed questions about color choices and perspective, and Maya glowed under the attention. Daniel excused himself to finish the clear coat work, needing space to process the conversation that had veered into uncomfortable honesty. He applied the clear coat with the same meticulous care he'd given the color layers, then the second coat, each step precise and measured. By 4 o'clock, the work was complete. The repair was perfect, absolutely invisible unless you knew exactly where to look and examined the surface under specific lighting. Daniel stood back and examined it from every angle, feeling satisfaction settle into his chest. He'd done exactly what he'd promised. The debt was paid. He found Isabella and Maya in what appeared to be a home office, Maya drawing at a large desk while Isabella worked on a laptop nearby. Come see. Isabella saved whatever she was come see? Isabella saved whatever she was working on and followed him to the garage, Maya trailing behind. Daniel led them to the sedan and gestured to the repaired panel. If you look here, where the scratch was, you can't see any evidence of damage. The color match is perfect, the surface is smooth, and once the clear coat fully cures over the next few days, it'll be as strong as the original finish. Isabella crouched down, examining the panel from multiple angles, running her fingers lightly over the surface. Daniel watched nervously, waiting for her verdict. Daniel, this is incredible. Isabella stood, genuine admiration in her expression. I literally cannot tell there was ever any damage. This is professional quality work. Better than professional, honestly. I've seen body shops charge thousands for repairs that don't look this good. The praise made Daniel's face warm. I told you I'd make it right. You certainly did. Isabella paused, seeming to consider something. Can I ask you a question, and I want you to be honest? Of course. Do you like the work you do at Morrison's auto shop? The question caught Daniel off guard. I mean, it's fine. It's steady work, decent pay. It pays the bills. Why? Because watching you work these past 2 days, I've seen someone who takes real pride in what they do. Someone with skill and attention to detail that most people don't possess. And I just wondered if changing oil and rotating tires is really what you want to be doing. Daniel felt defensive walls rising. It's honest work. I didn't say it wasn't. I'm just asking if it's what you want, what you'd choose if you had options. I don't have options, Daniel said, hearing the edge in his own voice. I have a daughter to support and bills to pay. I can't afford to have dreams about what I want to do. I have to focus on what keeps food on the table. Isabella held up her hands in a gesture of peace. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overstep. I just think you're talented, and talent should be recognized. Talent doesn't pay rent. No, but it should still be acknowledged. Isabella's expression softened. Look, I know we don't know each other well, but I've watched you work, and I've seen how you are with your daughter, and I think you're capable of more than you give yourself credit for. That's all I'm saying. Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to explain that capability didn't matter when you were drowning in responsibility, but Maya chose that moment to tug on his sleeve. Daddy, I'm hungry. Daniel checked his watch and was startled to realize it was nearly 5. The afternoon had evaporated while he'd been focused on the repair work. We should get going, he said, grateful for the excuse to end this uncomfortable conversation. Let you have your evening back. Stay for dinner, Isabella said suddenly. Please. I was going to order from this Italian place nearby. They have amazing pasta and enough variety that even picky 6-year-olds can find something they like. She looked down at Maya. What do you think? Want to have dinner here before you go home? Maya's face lit up, and she looked to Daniel with hope written across her features. Daniel wanted to say no, wanted to maintain some kind of distance, but he was tired of fighting against kindness. Okay, he said. Dinner would be nice. Thank you. Isabella's smile was radiant. Perfect. I'll place the order now. It usually takes about 40 minutes for delivery, so that gives us time to relax a bit. The 40 minutes turned into an hour and a half. The food arrived, mountains of it, way more than 3 people could possibly eat. And they sat at Isabella's dining table, which could have seated 12 but felt surprisingly intimate with just the 3 of them. Maya chattered about everything and nothing, and Isabella engaged with every topic like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever heard. Daniel found himself relaxing despite his earlier defensiveness, drawn into easy conversation about movies and books and the weird things kids at Maya's school did. There's this boy named Tyler who eats glue, Maya announced with the scandalized delight of children sharing forbidden knowledge, like actual glue. The teacher has to watch him all the time. That's certainly memorable, Isabella said, barely suppressing a smile. Does Tyler offer any explanation for this habit? He says it tastes like marshmallows, but I don't think he's ever actually had a marshmallow because glue definitely doesn't taste like that. How do you know what glue tastes like? Daniel asked with mock sternness. Maya giggled. I don't, but I know it can't taste like marshmallows. That's just science. Isabella laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that made her look years younger, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest. When was the last time he'd sat at a dinner table with another adult, sharing a meal and conversation that wasn't about work schedules or bills? When was the last time he'd felt like part of something larger than just him and Maya against the world? After dinner, Maya crashed on Isabella's couch again, her stomach full and her energy depleted. Daniel knew he should wake her, should get them both home and back to their regular life, but he found himself lingering in the living room with Isabella, both of them speaking in hushed tones while Maya slept. I really do need to get her home, Daniel said, but he didn't move to wake his daughter. School tomorrow. Of course. Isabella was curled into the same armchair she'd occupied yesterday, looking relaxed in a way she hadn't earlier. Can I ask you something? And feel free to tell me it's none of my business. You can ask. Earlier, when you got defensive about your work at Morrison's, that reaction came from somewhere, like you've had this conversation before. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering how much to share. Sarah, my wife, she used to say I was wasting my potential, that I could do more than work at a shop doing basic maintenance. She wanted me to go back to school, get certifications, maybe even start my own business eventually. She had all these dreams for what I could become. And what did you want? I wanted to take care of my family. That was enough for me. Daniel paused, his throat tight. After she died, all those conversations felt different, like maybe she'd been trying to tell me I wasn't enough as I was, that I needed to be more, do more. It's stupid, I know, but when you started asking about whether I liked my work, it touched that same nerve. Daniel, I wasn't suggesting you weren't enough. Isabella's voice was gentle but firm. I was suggesting that you might be capable of more than your current circumstances allow. Those are 2 very different things. Are they? Yes. Being enough isn't about what you do or how much money you make. It's about who you are. And from what I've seen, you're a good man, a devoted father, and a talented craftsman. That's already more than enough. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't want more for yourself if that's what you choose. Daniel looked at this woman who'd been a stranger 48 hours ago, who somehow seemed to see past every defense mechanism he'd built, and felt something crack open in his chest. I don't know how to want more, he admitted quietly. I've spent so long in survival mode that I don't remember what it feels like to think beyond next week's paycheck. Maybe that's something you could start allowing yourself to consider. Isabella leaned forward slightly, not because you're lacking, but because you deserve the space to dream a little. They sat in silence for a moment, the words hanging in the air between them. Then Maya stirred on the couch, and the spell broke. I really do need to get her home, Daniel said, standing. Thank you for everything today. The meals, the company, the conversation, all of it. Thank you for the beautiful repair work. Isabella stood as well. And for sharing dinner with me. It was the most pleasant evening I've had in a very long time. Daniel gently woke Maya, who was drowsy and confused as he carried her to the truck. Isabella walked them out, standing in her doorway as they pulled away, and Daniel caught her wave in his rearview mirror, a solitary figure in the frame of an enormous house, looking somehow smaller than she had before. The drive home was quiet, Maya dozing in the passenger seat, Daniel's mind churning with thoughts he couldn't quite organize. The repair was done. The debt was paid. There was no reason to see Isabella Vaughn again, no excuse to return to that beautiful, lonely house. So why did leaving feel less like relief and more like loss? He carried Maya up to their apartment, got her into pajamas without fully waking her, and tucked her into bed. Then he stood in their small living room, looking around at the modest space that had been home for 3 years, and felt the weight of everything he'd been trying not to feel since Saturday. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Thank you again for the excellent work. If you ever need a reference for future jobs, please don't hesitate to ask. Isabella. Daniel stared at the message, then saved the number to his contacts. He typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, "Thank you for your kindness. It meant more than you know." The reply came quickly. "The feeling is mutual. Take care, Daniel." He set down his phone and sat on his worn couch in the quiet apartment, the contrast between his world and Isabella's never more apparent. She'd been kind, yes, but kindness didn't bridge the gap between their vastly different lives. Better to remember these 2 days as a strange, pleasant interlude and move forward. That was the sensible thing to do. But as Daniel lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about dark hair and genuine smiles and conversations that had felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years, he couldn't quite convince himself that sensible was what he wanted. The text came on Wednesday afternoon while Daniel was elbow-deep in the engine compartment of a Toyota Camry that had been misfiring for reasons he was still trying to diagnose. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he almost ignored it, probably another spam call about his car's extended warranty, but something made him pull off his gloves and check. "I know this might seem strange, but I was wondering if you and Maya would like to come for dinner Friday evening. No obligation, just an invitation." Isabella Danielle stared at the message for a full 30 seconds, grease-stained fingers hovering over the screen. 4 days had passed since he'd finished the repair work. 4 days of returning to normal routines and trying not to think about dark hair and genuine laughter and conversations that had felt dangerously close to connection. He'd almost convinced himself that whatever he'd felt during those 2 weekends was just gratitude mixed with loneliness. Nothing more substantial than that. Now here was proof that maybe Isabella had felt something too. Or maybe she was just being kind again, extending charity to the struggling single father and his daughter. Daniel's jaw tightened at the thought. "Harper, you gonna fix that Camry or just stare at your phone all day?" Jenkins called from across the shop floor. "Working on it," Daniel called back, shoving his phone into his pocket without responding to the message. He didn't text back during his lunch break either, or during the afternoon lull when business slowed down. He told himself he needed time to think, to consider whether accepting would be wise or just opening a door that should stay closed. But the truth was simpler and more uncomfortable. He was afraid. Afraid of what it might mean to see Isabella again. Afraid of the feelings that had been simmering under his surface since Sunday night. Afraid of wanting something he had no business wanting. By the time his shift ended at 6, Daniel still hadn't responded. He picked up Maya from the after-school program, made dinner, mac and cheese, from a box. The kind Maya loved, and that made Daniel feel vaguely guilty about nutritional inadequacy and helped her with homework. They went through their evening routine with practiced efficiency, and Daniel tried not to notice how quiet the apartment felt, how small their world seemed after those brief glimpses into Isabella's spacious house. "Daddy?" Maya asked as he was tucking her into bed. "Can we visit Ms. Isabella again sometime?" Daniel's chest tightened. "Why do you want to visit her, sweetheart?" "Because she's nice, and she listens to my stories, and she has really good art supplies." Maya paused, her small face serious. "And I think she likes having us there. She smiled a lot when we were there, more than most grown-ups smile." Out of the mouths of children came uncomfortable truths. Daniel smoothed Maya's hair back from her forehead, buying himself time to formulate a response. Ms. Isabella was very kind to us, but she's a busy person with her own life. We can't just keep visiting whenever we want. But what if she wants us to visit? It's more complicated than that, baby. Why? Because your father is terrified of feeling something real again. Because the distance between our lives and hers is too vast to bridge. Because wanting things you can't have only leads to pain. Because grown-up friendships are different than kid friendships, Daniel said instead. Sometimes people are nice to each other for a little while and then go back to their regular lives. That doesn't mean they didn't care, it just means that's how things work sometimes. Maya looked unsatisfied with this answer, but accepted it with the resignation of children who'd learned not to push too hard. Okay, Daddy. After she fell asleep, Daniel sat on his couch and pulled out his phone. Isabella's message was still there, unanswered, a small act of kindness that he was repaying with silence. He should just decline politely, thank her for the invitation, but explain that it wouldn't be appropriate. Clean break, no hard feelings, everyone moving on with their separate lives. His fingers typed the opposite. That's very kind of you. Maya would love that. What time should we come? The response came within minutes. Is 6:30 too late? And Daniel, this isn't charity or pity. I enjoyed your company and thought it might be nice to do it again. That's all. Daniel read the message 3 times, trying to parse the subtext, looking for hidden meanings or ulterior motives. But the words were straightforward, almost painfully so. Maybe he was overthinking this. Maybe it really was just 2 people who'd enjoyed each other's company deciding to do it again. 6:30 works. Can we bring anything? Just yourselves? Looking forward to it. Daniel set down his phone and sat in the quiet apartment, wondering what exactly he'd just agreed to and whether he was making a terrible mistake. The next 2 days passed in a strange fog of anticipation and anxiety. Daniel found himself distracted at work, double-checking repairs he'd normally complete on autopilot, his mind wandering to Friday evening and what it might mean. He caught himself thinking about Isabella at odd moments, the way she'd looked when she laughed, the careful way she'd listened when he talked about Sarah, the loneliness he'd glimpsed beneath her polished exterior. Friday arrived with uncomfortable speed. Daniel left work early, claiming a doctor's appointment he didn't have, and took Maya home to change. His wardrobe wasn't exactly extensive. Work clothes, a few pairs of jeans, some t-shirts that had seen better days. He settled on his newest jeans and a button-down shirt he usually reserved for the rare occasions that required looking presentable. "Why are you dressed fancy, Daddy?" Maya asked, already in her favorite purple dress that she insisted on wearing despite the small stain on the collar that wouldn't come out. "I'm not fancy, I'm just neat." Daniel checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror and immediately felt ridiculous. This wasn't a date. This was dinner with someone who'd been kind to them. The button-down was too much. He changed back into a regular shirt, then changed again, then finally forced himself to stop being absurd and just pick something. They arrived at Isabella's house at exactly 6:30. Daniel had made sure of that, not wanting to be early and seem too eager or late, and seem disrespectful. The evening sun painted the house in golden light, making it look even more impressive than he remembered. Isabella opened the door wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, and Daniel felt something in his chest shift at the sight of her. She looked relaxed, happy to see them, and the smile that lit her face when Maya ran up for a hug was genuine enough to quiet some of his anxious thoughts. "I'm so glad you came," Isabella said, ushering them inside. "I wasn't sure you'd want to, honestly. I worried I might have overstepped by asking." "Not at all," Daniel said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "It was kind of you to invite us." Dinner was homemade this time, pasta with a sauce that Isabella admitted she'd attempted to make herself following a recipe with varying degrees of success. It was actually pretty good, and the fact that she'd made the effort rather than ordering takeout felt significant somehow, though Daniel couldn't articulate why. They ate at the kitchen island again, that same spot that was becoming familiar, and conversation flowed easily. Maya talked about school, about the boy who ate glue, about her teacher who had the longest fingernails Maya had ever seen. Isabella listened with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions and laughing at Maya's elaborate descriptions. "Ms. Isabella, do you have any kids?" Maya asked suddenly, with the blunt curiosity of 6-year-olds who hadn't yet learned which questions were too personal. Maya, Daniel started, but Isabella held up a hand. It's okay. No, Maya, I don't have children. I've always thought I might want them someday, but the timing never seemed right, and now I'm not sure it's something that will happen for me. Why not? Because having children usually requires having a partner, and I'm not very good at that part, Isabella said with unexpected honesty. I work a lot, and I'm not always great at making time for relationships. It's something I'm trying to get better at, but it's hard to change old habits. Daniel heard the vulnerability beneath her words and felt a rush of empathy. Here was someone who had everything material success could provide, but was still searching for the human connections that actually mattered. After dinner, Maya asked if she could draw again, and Isabella set her up in the office with fresh paper and the good-colored pencils. That left Daniel and Isabella alone in the kitchen, cleaning up together in comfortable silence. Can I ask you something? Isabella said as she dried the dishes Daniel was washing. And I want you to know you can tell me if I'm being too nosy. You can ask. Why did you really come tonight? You could have declined the invitation. It would have been perfectly reasonable. Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Maya wanted to see you again, and honestly, so did I. The last 2 weeks have felt different since we met. Quieter, maybe. Lonelier. I didn't realize how much I'd been missing adult conversation until we had it. I felt the same way, Isabella admitted. I came home Sunday night after you left, and the house felt emptier than it ever had before. It made me realize how much of my life I spend alone, and how much I'd convinced myself that was fine when it really isn't. They finished the dishes and moved to the living room where they could hear Maya humming to herself in the office. Isabella poured wine for both of them, a bottle that probably cost more than Daniel's weekly grocery budget, and they sat in the comfortable furniture that was starting to feel less intimidating. Tell me about your work, Daniel said. You mentioned you're in automotive management, but you've never really explained what that means. Something flickered across Isabella's face, that same hesitation he'd noticed before when the topic came up. It's not that interesting, honestly. Lots of meetings and strategy discussions and travel. The kind of corporate work that sounds impressive but is actually quite tedious. You're being modest. Management level at an automotive company? That's a significant position. I suppose. Isabella took a sip of her wine, her expression carefully neutral. What about you? Beyond the work at Morrison's, what do you want? If circumstances were different, if you had unlimited resources, what would you do? The question was so similar to what she'd asked before, but this time it didn't feel like criticism. It felt like genuine curiosity, like she actually wanted to understand him. I used to want my own shop, Daniel admitted. Not anything huge, just a small place where I could do quality work for fair prices. Build relationships with customers. Take pride in the repairs. Maybe train a few young mechanics. Sarah and I used to talk about it late at night. What we'd call it, where it would be, how we'd make it work. What stopped you? Reality. Starting a business requires capital I don't have, and taking that kind of risk when you've got a kid depending on you feels irresponsible. Morrison's pays the bills. That has to be enough. But it's not what you want. Wanting and having are two different things, Isabella. I learned that lesson a long time ago. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those dark, thoughtful eyes. What if you could have both? What if there was a way to work toward what you wanted while still maintaining stability? There isn't. I've run the numbers 100 times. The math doesn't work. Maybe you're using the wrong math. Isabella set down her wine glass and leaned forward slightly. What if you had an investor? Someone willing to provide startup capital in exchange for a stake in the business? Daniel felt his defenses rise immediately. I'm not looking for charity. It's not charity, it's business. I'm in automotive, remember? I understand the industry, and I've seen your work. You're talented, Daniel, meticulous. The kind of mechanic people would come back to again and again because they trust you. That's valuable. That's worth investing in. Well, you don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're honest even when it costs you. I know you take pride in your work. I know you're a devoted father who would do anything for his daughter. Those are the qualities that make a business owner successful, not just technical skill. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing to the window and looking out at the manicured lawn. Why are you doing this? First the repair arrangement, then the dinners, now this? What do you want from me, Isabella? The words came out harsher than he intended, fueled by confusion and fear and the uncomfortable feeling that he was losing control of a situation he didn't understand. When he turned back, Isabella was standing too, her expression a mix of hurt and frustration. "I'm doing this because I like you, Daniel, because I enjoyed our conversations, and I think you deserve a chance to build something better for yourself and Maya. Is that really so hard to believe?" "Yes, actually it is. People like you don't just randomly decide to invest in people like me. There's always an angle, always something they want in return." "People like me?" Isabella's voice had gone cold. "You mean wealthy people? Successful people? People who live in big houses?" "People who live in a completely different world than I do," Daniel shot back. "You have no idea what my life is actually like, Isabella. You can play at understanding, invite us over for dinner, and offer business opportunities, but at the end of the day, you go back to this mansion, and I go back to a 2-bedroom apartment where the hot water only works half the time. We're not living in the same reality." "You're right," Isabella said quietly. "We're not, but I never pretended we were. I've been nothing but honest with you from the beginning." "Have you?" Daniel heard himself saying, his anxiety transforming into something uglier. "You've told me you work in automotive management, but you've been vague about the details. You live in a house that probably costs millions, drive a luxury sedan, but act like we're just two regular people having dinner. Something doesn't add up, Isabella. What are you implying?" "I'm saying I don't know who you really are. And I don't understand why someone like you would waste time on someone like me unless there was something you weren't telling me." Isabella's face had gone very pale. "You want to know who I really am? Fine. My full name is Isabella Vaughn, and I'm the CEO of Meridian Automotive. That's not management level, that's the top. I run a company with 42,000 employees and annual revenue in the billions. I didn't tell you because I wanted, just for once, to be seen as a person rather than a title or a bank account. I wanted someone to talk to me without immediately calculating what they could get from me." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. CEO, billions, 42,000 employees. The numbers didn't even fully register because they were so far outside his frame of reference. He stood there staring at Isabella, trying to reconcile the woman who'd made him pasta with the corporate executive who ran one of the largest automotive companies in the country. "Meridian Automotive," he repeated, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. I'm exactly who I've always been, Daniel. The only difference is now you know what I do for a living." Isabella's voice was tight with emotion. "And I can see in your face that it changes everything. Which is exactly why I didn't tell you. You lied to me. I omitted details. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing." Daniel felt anger rising to replace his shock, a defensive shield against the complicated feelings churning in his chest. "You let me pour my heart out about struggling to make ends meet, about not being able to afford my daughter's school supplies while you're sitting on billions of dollars. How do you think that makes me feel? I never asked you to tell me those things. You shared them because we were having honest conversations about our lives." Isabella's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And for the record, I told you about my own loneliness, about struggling to maintain relationships, about feeling like my house was too empty. Those weren't lies, Daniel. That was me being vulnerable with you. It's not the same, and you know it. You choose to be alone in your mansion. I don't have a choice about my circumstances. So, because I'm successful, I'm not allowed to have feelings? I'm not allowed to be lonely or want connection or extend kindness to people I care about? People you care about?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "You don't know me well enough to care about me, Isabella. This whole thing, the dinners, the business talk, all of it, it's just you playing at normal life before going back to your executive suite and private jets or whatever the hell else comes with running a billion-dollar company. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is you pretending we could ever be equals when we exist in completely different stratospheres. I scratched your car, Isabella, a car that probably costs more than I'll earn in 5 years. And instead of just getting it fixed and moving on, you turned it into this, whatever this is. This experiment in slumming it with the working class? Get out!" Isabella's voice was shaking. "If that's really what you think of me, then you should leave, now." Daniel stood there for a moment, breathing hard, his anger already starting to curdle into regret. Maya's voice drifted from the office, still humming happily, completely unaware that the fragile connection between the adults was shattering. "Isabella," I said, "get out." Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice was steel. "Thank you for making it abundantly clear how you really see me. Just another rich person using their money to manipulate people for entertainment. I'm glad I found out now before I made the mistake of thinking we were actually building something meaningful." Daniel wanted to take it back, wanted to explain that the anger came from fear and feeling small, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded stiffly and walked to the office to collect Maya. "We have to go, sweetheart," he said, his voice sounding hollow. "Already? But I'm not finished with my picture." "We can finish it at home. Come on." Maya's face fell, but she gathered her things without further protest, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand it. Isabella was nowhere to be seen as Daniel led his daughter to the front door. He paused there, hand on the doorknob, wanting to turn back and apologize, wanting to fix this before it became irreparable. But pride and fear kept him moving forward, out the door and down to his truck, buckling Maya into her seat while she asked questions he couldn't answer about why they were leaving so suddenly and why Ms. Isabella hadn't said goodbye. The drive home was silent except for Maya's worried voice asking if Ms. Isabella was mad at them. Daniel assured her that no, it wasn't her fault, that sometimes grown-ups had disagreements that had nothing to do with little girls. But inside, he was replaying the conversation, hearing his own words echo with increasing cruelty. He'd called her a manipulator, accused her of playing games, reduced her kindness to some twisted form of entertainment. And the worst part was that he knew, even in the moment he was saying those things, that he was wrong, that he was lashing out because finding out who Isabella really was had made him feel impossibly small, had highlighted the vast distance between their lives in a way he couldn't ignore. She'd been vulnerable with him, had shared her loneliness, her struggles with relationships, her desire for genuine connection, and he'd thrown it all back in her face because his pride couldn't handle the truth. That night, after putting a confused and upset Maya to bed, Daniel sat in his dark living room and stared at his phone. He typed and deleted a dozen different apologies, none of them adequate for what he'd done. Finally, he settled on simple honesty. "I'm sorry. I was cruel and unfair. You deserved better than that." The message showed as delivered but not read. Hours passed with no response. Daniel finally fell asleep on the couch, phone in hand, checking every time he woke up to see if Isabella had replied. She hadn't. Saturday brought no response either. Or Sunday. By Monday, Daniel had accepted that he'd destroyed whatever connection they'd been building, had taken something potentially beautiful and crushed it under the weight of his own insecurity. Work became a refuge from his thoughts, though even there he couldn't escape reminders of Isabella. A silver sedan came into the shop. Not hers, but close enough to make his chest ache. One of the other mechanics mentioned reading an article about Meridian Automotive's new sustainability initiatives, and Daniel had to leave the room before anyone noticed his reaction. Maya asked about Ms. Isabella every single day, wanting to know when they could visit again, if she was okay. Whether Daddy had done something to make her sad. Each question was a small knife to Daniel's heart. "I made a mistake, baby," he told her finally, after a week of deflecting. "I said some things I shouldn't have said, and I hurt Ms. Isabella's feelings. Sometimes even grown-ups mess up and don't know how to fix it." "Did you say sorry?" "I tried, but sometimes sorry isn't enough." Maya considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "You should send her flowers. That's what Prince Eric does in The Little Mermaid when he makes a mistake." "I don't think flowers are going to fix this one, sweetheart." But the idea stuck with him anyway. Not flowers, that felt hollow, too impersonal, but something that showed he understood the magnitude of his mistake. Something that demonstrated he'd been listening during their conversations, that he'd actually cared about what she shared even as he was sabotaging everything. It took him 3 days to work up the courage. 3 days of drafting and revising a letter that tried to capture everything he couldn't say in a text message or voicemail. He wrote about his fear, his insecurity, the way finding out who she really was had triggered every defensive mechanism he'd built over years of struggling. He apologized for the cruelty, for reducing her kindness to manipulation, for letting his pride damage something that had been genuinely good. He didn't ask for forgiveness or another chance, He just wanted her to know that he was sorry and that the connection they'd shared, however brief, had mattered to him. Daniel drove to her house on a Thursday evening after Maya was asleep and his sister had agreed to stay with her. He pulled up to that familiar driveway, his heart hammering, and left the letter in her mailbox. He didn't knock on the door or try to see her, just left the letter and drove away, knowing it was probably futile but needing to try anyway. 2 more days of silence followed. Daniel had given up expecting a response and was trying to figure out how to move forward when his phone finally buzzed on Saturday afternoon. "Thank you for the letter. I appreciate you taking the time to explain. I need more time to process everything, but I wanted you to know I read it and I'm thinking about what you said. Isabella." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation to resume what they'd been building, but it was acknowledgement, and right now that felt like more than Daniel had any right to hope for. He responded simply, "Take all the time you need. I'll be here if and when you're ready to talk." The days turned into weeks. October gave way to November, the weather turning cold enough that Daniel had to dig out Maya's winter coat and realize with dismay that it was too small. Money was tighter than ever. The paint and supplies he'd purchased for Isabella's car repair had created a shortfall he was still trying to fill. The electricity bill was overdue again, and Maya's school was sending home notices about unpaid lunch fees. But somehow, those practical concerns felt less crushing than the ache of losing something he'd barely had time to understand. Daniel found himself thinking about Isabella at odd moments, wondering what she was doing, whether she ever thought about him, if the house still felt too empty, or if she'd moved on to filling it with other people who wouldn't let their insecurities destroy fragile connections. He threw himself into work with renewed intensity, picking up extra hours when offered, taking on side jobs that other mechanics didn't want. Jenkins noticed and made a few comments about Daniel working himself to death, but didn't push it. The physical exhaustion was welcome. It meant falling asleep quickly instead of lying awake replaying conversations and imagining different outcomes. Maya stopped asking about Ms. Isabella after the 3rd week, though Daniel sometimes caught her looking at the stuffed elephant with a sad expression that broke his heart. He'd taken something away from his daughter too, not just from himself, and that guilt was harder to bear than his own regret. It was late November, 3 weeks since Isabella's last message, when Daniel's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He almost didn't answer, probably another spam call, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Daniel." Isabella's voice, careful and measured. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" His heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Yes. Yeah, of course. I've been thinking about everything that happened, about what you said, both in the moment and in your letter." Isabella paused, and Daniel could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "You were right about some things. I should have been upfront about who I was from the beginning. Not telling you felt like a small omission at first, but it became deceptive by default. I'm sorry for that." "Isabella, please let me finish. You were also wrong about a lot of things. I wasn't slumming it or experimenting with normal life. I was trying to connect with someone who seemed genuine, who treated me like a person instead of a position. But I understand why you reacted the way you did. The revelation about my job came as a shock, and you felt blindsided. I should have anticipated that." Daniel sat down on his couch, gripping the phone like a lifeline. "I was cruel. There's no excuse for the things I said. You opened up to me about real struggles, your loneliness, your difficulty maintaining relationships, and I dismissed all of it because I was too busy feeling sorry for myself. You were hurt and defensive. I get that now. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't, but it makes it human." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something? And I want complete honesty, even if you think it will hurt my feelings. Anything. If I hadn't told you who I really was, would you have kept seeing me? Would we have continued building whatever we were building?" The question cut straight to the heart of everything. Daniel took a deep breath. "Yes. Without hesitation. Being with you felt easy in a way nothing has felt easy since Sarah died. You made me laugh, made me think, made me want things I'd stopped letting myself want. The person you were when we had dinner, when we talked about our lives, that person was someone I was falling for." He heard Isabella's sharp intake of breath. "Was. Still am, if I'm being completely honest. Finding out you're a CEO didn't change who you are, Isabella. It just made me confront how different our worlds are, and I handled that badly. Our worlds are only as different as we let them be, Daniel. Yes, I have money and professional success, but I also have the same human needs for connection and understanding that everyone has, the same desire to be seen and valued for who I am rather than what I've achieved. I know that now. I should have known it then. So where does that leave us? Isabella's voice was soft, vulnerable in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. Because I've spent 3 weeks trying to talk myself out of caring about you and Maya, and I can't seem to manage it. Every time I walk past my office and see the space where Maya used to draw, every time I eat dinner alone in that enormous kitchen, I miss you both so much it physically hurts. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, hope and fear and longing all tangled together. I don't know where it leaves us. I want to say we can pick up where we left off, but I also know it's not that simple. We've got real obstacles, Isabella. Not just the money difference, but lifestyle, expectations. The practical realities of trying to build something between a CEO and a mechanic with a 6-year-old daughter. What if we started smaller? Not trying to figure out the whole future, just seeing each other again, talking, being honest about who we are and what we want without letting fear make our decisions for us. I'd like that, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. I'd really like that. Good. He could hear the smile in Isabella's voice. How about dinner, this Sunday, if you're free? And Daniel, I promise no more secrets, complete honesty from here on out. Same here. No more letting pride get in the way. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing as easily as it had before everything fell apart. Isabella told him about a difficult acquisition her company was negotiating, and Daniel told her about the 1967 Mustang that had come into the shop with electrical problems he was slowly unraveling. They talked about Maya's upcoming school Thanksgiving play, about Isabella's upcoming trip to Detroit for a board meeting, about small mundane details that felt significant simply because they were being shared. When they finally said goodbye, Daniel sat in his quiet apartment feeling lighter than he had in weeks. It wasn't fixed, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but it was something. A chance to try again, to build something real on a foundation of honesty instead of assumptions. He couldn't wait to tell Maya that they'd be seeing Ms. Isabella again. Sunday arrived with the kind of nervous anticipation that made Daniel check the clock every 10 minutes starting at noon, even though they weren't supposed to be at Isabella's house until 6. Maya had noticed his distraction immediately. Her 6-year-old radar finally tuned to her father's emotional states after years of it being just the two of them. Are you excited to see Ms. Isabella? She asked over lunch, swinging her legs under the kitchen table while she ate her grilled cheese sandwich. I am, Daniel admitted, because there was no point in pretending otherwise. Are you? Maya's face lit up with pure joy. Yes, I missed her so much, Daddy. I have a million things to tell her about school, and about the Thanksgiving play, and about how Mrs. Peterson's fish died, and we had a funeral for it. A funeral for a goldfish? It was very sad. We sang a song, and everything. Maya took another bite of her sandwich, then looked at Daniel with sudden seriousness. Daddy, are you going to fight with Ms. Isabella again? The question hit harder than it should have. I hope not, sweetheart. The last time wasn't really a fight. It was more like a misunderstanding. But we talked about it, and we're going to try to do better. Good, because I don't like it when people I love are sad. People I love. Maya said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, that Daniel almost missed the significance. His daughter had already decided that Isabella was part of their small circle, had already made space for her in that fierce 6-year-old heart that loved completely and without reservation. The weight of that responsibility settled over Daniel like a physical thing. Whatever happened between him and Isabella, whatever they managed to build or failed to sustain, it would affect Maya too. He couldn't afford to mess this up again. They arrived at Isabella's house at exactly 6 o'clock. Daniel had learned his lesson about punctuality. And this time when the door opened, there was a moment of awkward hesitation before anyone moved. Isabella stood in the doorway looking uncertain in a way Daniel had never seen before, her confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. Hi, she said softly. Hi, Daniel replied, and then Maya was pushing past both of them, launching herself at Isabella with the kind of full-body hug that only children could deliver. I missed you so much. Maya's voice was muffled against Isabella's sweater. Daddy said you and him had a misunderstanding, but you talked about it, and now everything is okay again. Isabella caught Daniel's eye over Maya's head, and something passed between them. A shared acknowledgement that nothing was quite okay yet. But they were trying. She hugged Maya back fiercely, and when she pulled away, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I missed you too, sweetheart. Come on in, both of you. I made lasagna, and I promise I followed the recipe exactly this time, so it should actually be edible. The house felt different somehow, though Daniel couldn't immediately identify what had changed. Then he realized there were small signs of life that hadn't been there before. A pair of running shoes by the door, a book left open on the coffee table, a sweater draped over the back of a chair. The space felt more lived in, less like a museum and more like an actual home. Dinner was slightly awkward at first, both adults hyper-aware of each other while trying to act normal for Maya's sake. But Maya herself broke the tension by launching into an elaborate story about the goldfish funeral, complete with dramatic reenactments of how different classmates had reacted to the death of Mr. Bubbles. And then Tyler, you remember Tyler who eats glue? He said that Mr. Bubbles was in fish heaven now, and Sarah Mitchell said there's no such thing as fish heaven. And Tyler started crying, so Mrs. Peterson had to explain that everyone believes different things, and that's okay. Maya paused for breath, then added, I think there probably is a fish heaven. Or at least I hope there is, because Mr. Bubbles was a very good fish. That's a lovely thought, Isabella said, her expression soft. I'm sure if there is a fish heaven, Mr. Bubbles is very happy there. That's what I told Tyler. And then he stopped crying, and we all sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Even though Mrs. Peterson said that wasn't really a funeral song, but we didn't know any actual funeral songs. Daniel found himself relaxing as the meal progressed, the familiar rhythm of Maya's chatter providing a buffer against the heavier conversations he knew needed to happen. Isabella seemed to relax too, her shoulders losing some of their tension, her smiles becoming more natural. After dinner, Maya asked if she could draw, and Isabella set her up in the office with fresh supplies. That left Daniel and Isabella alone in the kitchen, both of them suddenly uncertain now that their buffer was gone. Coffee? Isabella offered, moving toward the expensive espresso machine that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Sure. Thanks. They worked in silence for a moment, Isabella making coffee while Daniel cleared the dinner plates. The quiet felt heavy with unspoken words, all the things they'd carefully avoided saying in front of Maya. We should talk, Isabella said finally, handing Daniel a cup of coffee that smelled incredible. Really talk, about everything that happened and where we go from here. I know. I've been rehearsing what to say all week, but now that we're here, I don't know where to start. Start with the truth. That's what we promised each other, right? Complete honesty? Daniel took a breath and nodded. They moved to the living room, sitting in the same chairs they'd occupied that first Sunday, when everything had still felt possible before Daniel's pride had shattered it all. Okay. Truth. Daniel set down his coffee cup and looked directly at Isabella. Finding out who you really are terrified me. Not because of who you are, but because it made me confront how vast the distance is between our lives. I'm a mechanic who lives paycheck to paycheck in a rundown apartment. You're a CEO who runs a billion-dollar company. Those two worlds don't typically intersect, and when they do, it's usually not as equals. We are equals, Daniel. Are we? Because it doesn't feel that way. You can buy anything you want without thinking about it. I calculate whether I can afford a box of granola bars. You travel the world for business meetings. I've never left this state. You have power and influence and options. I have a 6-year-old daughter and about $14 in my checking account until Friday. How is that equal? Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. You're right that we have different financial circumstances. I'm not going to insult you by pretending otherwise, but equality isn't just about money, Daniel. It's about how we treat each other, how we value each other's perspectives and experiences. In that sense, we absolutely are equals. I want to believe that. But you don't. I don't know, Daniel admitted. Part of me does. The part that remembers our conversations, the way you listened when I talked about Sarah, the way you treated Maya like she mattered. That part believes you see me as an equal. But there's another part that keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop. For you to realize that this, whatever this is between us, isn't worth the complications. What complications? All of them. The fact that I come with a daughter who needs stability, not someone who might disappear from her life. The fact that your world involves corporate events and business dinners that I wouldn't fit into. The fact that people in your circles are going to judge you for being with someone like me, and eventually that judgment is going to matter more than whatever you feel right now. Isabella's jaw tightened. You're making a lot of assumptions about what I feel and what I can handle. Am I wrong? Yes, actually, you're wrong about several things. Isabella leaned forward, her eyes intense. First, I've already fallen for Maya. That happened the first weekend you were here, when she told me elaborate stories about her toy cars and asked me about my favorite color like it was the most important question in the world. If this thing between us doesn't work out, it won't be because I'm unwilling to accept that you have a daughter. Daniel's throat felt tight. And the other stuff? The social judgment? The different worlds? I spent 20 years building my career, Daniel. 20 years of working twice as hard as my male colleagues to be taken half as seriously. 20 years of enduring condescension and skepticism and outright sexism. Do you really think I'm going to let some country club gossips dictate who I spend my time with? Isabella's voice had an edge of steel now. I didn't fight my way to the top of a male-dominated industry just to let other people's opinions control my personal life. That's easy to say now, but when you're actually dealing with it, I've already dealt with it, Isabella interrupted. Do you think I haven't faced judgment my entire career? Do you think running a company as a woman in automotive hasn't required me to develop a very thick skin? I know how to handle criticism, Daniel. The question is whether you can handle being with someone whose life comes with that level of scrutiny. The reversal caught Daniel off guard. What do you mean? I mean that dating me isn't going to be simple. There will be photographers sometimes, especially at public events. There will be articles and speculation. People will have opinions about our relationship, about you, about whether you're with me for my money. Can you handle that? Can you handle people making assumptions about you based on who I am? Daniel hadn't considered that angle. He'd been so focused on his own insecurities about not being enough that he hadn't thought about the actual practical challenges of Isabella's public profile. I don't know, he said honestly. I've never dealt with anything like that before. Neither have I, not in a relationship context. I've never dated anyone seriously enough for it to become public knowledge, but I'm willing to figure it out if you are. Isabella paused, her expression softening. Daniel, I understand your fears, I do, but you can't let them make all your decisions. At some point, you have to decide whether what we have is worth the risk of getting hurt. Is it worth it to you? Yes. Isabella's answer was immediate and unflinching. What I feel when I'm with you and Maya, the ease, the laughter, the sense of being seen for who I actually am, rather than what I've achieved, that's worth navigating complications for. But I can't be the only one who thinks so. You have to decide what you want, independent of your fears about what might go wrong. Daniel stared at his coffee cup, watching the dark liquid ripple slightly with the tremor in his hands. Everything Isabella was saying made sense. She was right that he was letting fear drive his choices, right that he was making assumptions about what she could or couldn't handle, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it in his bones were two different things. What if I disappoint you? The words came out quieter than he'd intended. What if 6 months from now you realize that the reality of being with someone like me isn't as appealing as the idea of it? What if you realize the same thing about me? What if you decide that dating a CEO is more hassle than it's worth? Isabella met his eyes steadily. We could what if ourselves to death, Daniel, or we could acknowledge that any relationship involves risk and decide whether we trust each other enough to take it. Do you trust me? I'm here, aren't I? After everything that happened, after the cruel things you said, I called you because I couldn't stop thinking about you. That's trust, Daniel. That's me choosing to believe that the person I saw during those first weekends, the honest, caring, devoted father, is who you really are, not the hurt defensive man who lashed out when he felt cornered. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a subtle unwinding of the fear that had been coiled there since that terrible Friday night. I'm sorry. I've said it before, but I need you to know how much I mean it. The things I said about you manipulating me, about slumming it, that wasn't who you are. That was my own insecurity talking. I know. And I'm sorry too for not being upfront about my job from the beginning. I should have trusted you with the truth instead of making decisions about what you could handle. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their apologies settling between them like a foundation they could build on. So where do we go from here? Daniel asked finally. Forward, Isabella said simply. Slowly, if you need to. Honestly, definitely. But forward together, and we see where it leads. I'd like that. Daniel managed a small smile. Though I have to warn you, my life isn't exactly exciting. It's work and Maya's school and trying to keep up with laundry and bills. There's no glamour to it. Good. I have enough glamour in my professional life. What I want is real. Isabella's expression was soft, open in a way that made Daniel's heart ache. I want Sunday morning pancakes and homework help, and hearing about 6-year-old drama. I want someone to talk to at the end of long days. I want to feel like I'm coming home to something rather than just a big empty house. We can do that, Daniel said, feeling certainty settle into his bones for the first time since this whole complicated thing had started. Real. I can definitely do. Maya chose that moment to appear in the doorway, her latest artistic creation clutched in both hands. Look what I made. It's all of us together with the dog that Ms. Isabella should definitely get. The drawing showed 3 stick figures, one tall with dark hair that was clearly Isabella, one medium-sized with lighter hair representing Daniel, and one small figure with a big smile that was obviously Maya herself. Next to them was an enormous dog that appeared to be some kind of golden retriever-sized monster with a tail that took up half the page. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. Though I think that dog might be bigger than our apartment. It's a magic dog, Maya explained with 6-year-old logic. It can be whatever size it needs to be. Isabella laughed, that genuine sound that Daniel was learning to love, and pulled Maya onto her lap to examine the drawing more closely. A magic dog is exactly what I need. What should we name it? Pancake, Maya said immediately. Because pancakes are the best food and dogs are the best animals, so it makes sense. Pancake it is. Isabella looked up at Daniel over Maya's head, and the expression in her eyes was so full of affection and hope that it took his breath away. They spent the rest of the evening in easy companionship, Maya eventually falling asleep on the couch while Daniel and Isabella talked about safer topics, books they'd read, movies they wanted to see, the upcoming holidays, and what traditions they each observed. It felt like laying groundwork, building the everyday familiarity that relationships needed to survive beyond the initial attraction. When it was time to leave, Isabella walked them to the door, and there was a moment of awkwardness as Daniel shifted a sleeping Maya in his arms and tried to figure out how to say goodbye. Can I see you again? He asked. Not next weekend. I have to work Saturday and Sunday, but maybe during the week? Dinner one evening? I'd like that. I'm traveling Tuesday and Wednesday, but Thursday works if that's not too late in the week. Thursday is perfect. Daniel hesitated, then added, And Isabella, thank you for giving me another chance, for being willing to work through this instead of just walking away. Thank you for being brave enough to come back after you messed up. Isabella's smile was warm. That takes courage, admitting when you're wrong and trying to fix it. I had a good reason to be brave. Daniel glanced down at Maya sleeping in his arms. 2 good reasons, actually. He saw understanding dawn in Isabella's eyes, saw her register that he was including her in that count, and the smile that spread across her face was radiant. The drive home felt different this time. Lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Maya stirred when they got to the apartment, just conscious enough to stumble to her room with Daniel's guidance. He tucked her in and stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her sleep and thinking about the drawing she'd made. 3 stick figures and a magic dog. A family that didn't exist yet, but that Maya had already imagined into being with the certainty of childhood. Daniel wanted to give her that, wanted to build something stable and real that she could count on instead of watching from the sidelines while her father kept everyone at arm's length out of fear. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. I'm glad you came tonight. Sleep well. Daniel smiled and typed back. Me too. Good night, Isabella. Thursday dinner became a regular thing, then Saturday breakfast when Daniel's schedule allowed. Isabella would text during the week, small messages about her day, or questions about Maya or links to articles she thought Daniel would find interesting. He reciprocated, sending her photos of particularly interesting repair jobs or funny things Maya had said. They were building something, slowly and carefully, with an awareness of their earlier mistakes making them more thoughtful about each step. Isabella started joining them for Maya's school events. The Thanksgiving play where Maya was a very enthusiastic ear of corn, the holiday concert where she sang off-key with complete confidence. Daniel met Isabella for lunch near her office when his schedule permitted, seeing glimpses of her professional world and realizing that the competence and intelligence he'd seen in casual conversation translated into genuine leadership ability. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the differences in their circumstances created friction, like when Isabella casually suggested a weekend trip to a ski resort and couldn't understand why Daniel hesitated until he finally admitted he couldn't afford it. Or when Daniel's truck broke down and Isabella's first instinct was to suggest buying him a new vehicle, not grasping why he bristled at the offer. But they worked through each awkward moment with the honesty they'd promised each other. Isabella learned to think before making suggestions that involved spending money Daniel didn't have. Daniel learned to accept help when it was offered in the spirit of genuine care rather than pity. They were learning each other's boundaries, each other's triggers, each other's love languages. December brought an unexpected complication. Daniel was picking Maya up from school on a Tuesday afternoon when another parent, Lisa Morrison, whose son was in Maya's class, cornered him by the pickup area. "Daniel, I saw the most interesting article this morning," she said with the kind of smile that promised gossip. "About Isabella Vaughn, the automotive CEO. Apparently she's been spotted around town with a mystery man and his daughter. The photos were a bit grainy, but I could have sworn it looked like you." Daniel felt his stomach drop. He'd known this was coming eventually. Isabella had warned him about the public attention, but he hadn't expected it to reach Maya's school so quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said carefully, which was technically true. He hadn't seen any article or photos. "Oh, come on, you can tell me. Are you really dating Isabella Vaughn?" Because that's quite the catch for a mechanic. The way Lisa said mechanic made it clear she considered it several steps below CEO on some imaginary social ladder. "My personal life is private, Lisa. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get Maya home." He managed to extricate himself, but the damage was done. That evening, he received texts from 3 different people he barely knew, all asking variations of the same question. By the time he called Isabella, he was wound tight with anxiety. "Did you see the article?" he asked without preamble. "Yes. I'm sorry, Daniel. I should have anticipated this would happen." Isabella sounded tired. "They got photos of us at Maya's school play. Nothing scandalous, just us sitting together in the audience, but apparently that's enough for speculation. Lisa Morrison asked me about it at pickup today. She called you quite the catch for a mechanic." Daniel couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "This is what I was afraid of. People thinking I'm with you for your money or judging us for being from different worlds." "What did you tell her?" "That my personal life was private. But that's not going to stop the gossip, is it?" "No, it's not." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "We have options here. We can keep denying it and hope the interest dies down. We can avoid being seen together in public, keep things more private. Or we can confirm the relationship and deal with whatever scrutiny comes with that. What do you want to do?" Daniel thought about Maya's drawing of the 3 stick figures, thought about the easy dinners they'd been sharing, the way Isabella had become part of their routine, thought about hiding that because other people might have opinions about it. "I don't want to hide," he said finally. "I'm not ashamed of being with you, Isabella. I need to prepare myself for what comes with it." "We'll face it together," Isabella promised. "And Daniel? Anyone who judges you for being a mechanic or assumes you're with me for money, they don't know you. They don't know how hard you work or how devoted you are to Maya or how much integrity you have. Their opinions don't change who you actually are." "It's still hard to hear." "I know, but you're stronger than you think. We both are." They talked for another hour, Isabella sharing strategies she'd developed for dealing with media attention and public scrutiny. Daniel felt some of his anxiety ease as they made a plan together, how to talk to Maya about it, how to handle questions from people at school or work, how to maintain boundaries while still living their lives. The next few weeks tested those strategies. There were more articles, more photos, more speculation. Someone dug up information about Sarah's death and published it in a gossip column, framing Daniel as a tragic widower in a way that felt exploitative. One particularly nasty piece questioned whether Isabella was going through a phase of dating normal people, or if this was some kind of publicity stunt. Daniel wanted to quit, wanted to retreat back into the simple privacy of his old life where no one cared who he was with or what he did. But every time he considered walking away, he thought about the life they were building. The way Maya's face lit up when Isabella arrived for dinner, the conversations that made him feel seen and understood, the possibility of something more than just survival mode. Isabella faced her own challenges. Her board of directors expressed concern about her personal life choices affecting the company's image. One board member suggested in a meeting that perhaps she should reconsider the relationship until after a major merger was finalized. Isabella had stood up in that meeting and told them in no uncertain terms that her personal life was not up for committee review. She told Daniel about it later that evening, her voice shaking with residual anger. I told them that if they couldn't separate my competence as a CEO from who I choose to date, then perhaps they were the ones who needed to reconsider their positions. The merger is solid because of the work I've done, not because of my relationship status. What did they say? Nothing. Because they know I'm right. The merger is happening because I negotiated an incredible deal, and they're not going to jeopardize it over their personal discomfort with my dating life. Isabella paused. But I won't lie. It hurt that they even brought it up, like all my accomplishments could be overshadowed by who I'm sleeping with. I'm sorry. Daniel felt the weight of being the cause of her professional complications. If you need to step back from this until things calm down, don't you dare, Isabella interrupted. Don't you dare suggest that we give up because other people are being idiots. I didn't fight this hard to build a life on my own terms just to let other people's prejudices win. Her fierceness made Daniel's chest tight. Okay, no giving up. No giving up, Isabella agreed. We keep moving forward, together. And they did. Through the gossip and the scrutiny and the awkward questions, they kept building their relationship with deliberate care. Isabella started spending more time at Daniel's apartment, getting comfortable with their modest space and participating in their simple routines. Daniel gradually relaxed into Isabella's world, learning to navigate her professional circles without feeling like an imposter. Maya turned 7 in January, and they threw her a birthday party at Isabella's house that combined children from school with a few of Isabella's closest friends. Watching Maya run through that enormous house with her classmates, watching Isabella coordinate pizza and cake and party games with the efficiency of a CEO managing a corporate event, Daniel felt something settle into place. This could work. Despite all the complications and challenges, despite the vast differences in their circumstances, they were making it work through honesty and commitment and the willingness to keep choosing each other every single day. That evening, after all the guests had left and Maya was crashed on Isabella's couch in a sugar coma, Daniel and Isabella stood together in the kitchen cleaning up the remnants of the party. Thank you for today, Daniel said, gesturing at the decorations and leftover cake and general chaos of a successful 7-year-old's birthday. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to. Maya deserves to feel celebrated, and I wanted to be part of that. Isabella paused in her cleaning and turned to face him fully. Daniel, I need to tell you something. The seriousness in her tone made his stomach clench. Okay. I'm falling in love with you. With both of you, really, but especially you. Isabella's voice was steady despite the vulnerability in her eyes. I know we said we'd take things slow, and I'm not asking you to say it back if you're not ready. But I needed you to know. I needed to be honest about what I'm feeling. Daniel set down the trash bag he'd been holding and crossed the kitchen to stand in front of her. I'm falling in love with you too. I think I have been since those first weekends, even when I was too scared to admit it. Yeah? Yeah. Daniel reached out and took her hands, marveling at how natural it felt. You've become part of our lives, Isabella. Not just someone we see sometimes, but actually part of our family. Maya talks about you constantly. I think about you all the time. What we have, it's real, and it's worth everything we've had to navigate to get here. Isabella's smile was radiant, and when Daniel leaned in to kiss her, it felt like sealing a promise they'd been building toward since that first grocery store parking lot encounter months ago. Behind them, Maya's sleepy voice drifted from the living room. "Are you guys being mushy? Because that's gross, but also kind of nice." They broke apart laughing, and Daniel called back, "Go back to sleep, you little spy." "Can't sleep. Too much cake." Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Can we stay here tonight, please? I don't want to go home yet." Daniel looked at Isabella, who nodded without hesitation. "Of course you can stay. I'll get the guest room ready for you." As Isabella headed upstairs and Maya followed her chattering about what pajamas she'd need, Daniel stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by birthday party debris, and felt gratitude wash over him, for the courage to leave that note, for Isabella's unexpected kindness, for second chances and honest conversations, and the willingness to keep trying even when it was hard. They'd started with a scratched car and a choice to be honest. Now they were building something that looked remarkably like the family Maya had drawn months ago. 3 stick figures choosing each other, learning to navigate their differences, creating something real out of mutual respect and growing love. It wasn't perfect. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments where their different worlds created friction. But standing in Isabella's kitchen, listening to Maya's laughter echo from upstairs, Daniel knew with absolute certainty that it was worth it. Every complicated, messy, beautiful bit of it. The conversation Daniel had been dreading came on a rainy February afternoon, 6 weeks after Maya's birthday party. He was at Morrison's auto shop finishing up an oil change on a Subaru when Jenkins approached with an expression that immediately put Daniel on alert. "Got a minute, Harper?" Jenkins jerked his head toward the small office at the back of the shop. "Boss wants to see you." Daniel's stomach dropped. In 3 years of working at Morrison's, he'd been called to the office exactly twice. Once when he'd first been hired, and once when he'd needed to take emergency leave after Maya had the flu. Neither conversation had been casual. He wiped his hands on a rag and followed Jenkins, his mind racing through possibilities. Had he made a mistake on a repair? Missed too many days? The shop had been busier than usual lately, and Daniel had been pulling his weight. This didn't make sense. Gary Morrison sat behind his cluttered desk, looking uncomfortable in a way that made Daniel's anxiety spike higher. Gary was usually straightforward, the kind of boss who said what he meant without preamble. The fact that he was fidgeting with a pen suggested this conversation was going to be difficult. "Sit down, Daniel." Gary gestured to the chair across from him. "We need to talk." Daniel sat, his hands gripping his knees. "Is there a problem with my work?" "No, your work is fine. Say it straight." "I've been getting say it straight. I've been getting questions. From customers, from other staff, about your relationship with Isabella Vaughn." There it was. The professional fallout Daniel had been anticipating but hoping wouldn't materialize. "What kind of questions?" "Mostly curiosity at first. Is it true Daniel is dating that CEO?" "That kind of thing. I've been deflecting, telling people your personal life is your business." Gary paused, his expression troubled. "But then yesterday, I had a customer specifically request that you not work on her car. Said she didn't feel comfortable with someone who was obviously using a wealthy woman for her money, touching her vehicle." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. I'm not. "I know, kid. I know you're not that kind of person, but perception matters in this business. We rely on trust, on customers believing their mechanics are honest and hardworking. When gossip starts circulating that suggests otherwise..." Gary trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. "Are you firing me?" Daniel's voice came out rougher than he intended. "No, hell no. I'm not firing you. You're too good at what you do, and you've never given me reason to doubt your character." Gary leaned forward. "But I need you to understand the situation. If this continues, if more customers start questioning your integrity because of who you're dating, it could become a real problem, not just for you, but for the shop." Daniel sat in silence, processing the impossible position he was being put in. He could end things with Isabella, retreat back to the simple anonymity of his old life where no one cared who he was or what he did. It would solve the professional complications, eliminate the gossip, make everything easier. But the thought of walking away from what they'd built, the family dinners, the easy conversations, Maya's joy at having Isabella in their lives, made his chest physically ache. "What do you want me to do?" Daniel asked finally. I want you to keep being the excellent mechanic you've always been. Show up, do good work, treat customers with respect. The rest of it, the gossip, the assumptions, that'll die down eventually. It always does. Gary's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I think you're getting a raw deal. You found someone who makes you happy, and that should be celebrated, not turned into ammunition for small-minded people. But we don't always get to control how others see us. Daniel left the office feeling hollowed out. The rest of his shift passed in a blur of mechanical tasks performed on autopilot, while his mind churned with anxiety. By the time he picked up Maya from school, he'd worked himself into a state of barely controlled panic. He managed to get through their evening routine, homework, dinner, bath time, before finally calling Isabella after Maya was asleep. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with pleasure at hearing from him. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. How was your day?" "Complicated." Daniel sank onto his couch, suddenly exhausted. "I need to tell you something." The warmth in Isabella's voice was replaced by concern. "What happened?" Daniel explained the conversation with Gary, the customer's complaint, the growing awareness that their relationship was creating professional complications he hadn't fully anticipated. Isabella listened without interrupting, and when Daniel finally fell silent, she was quiet for a long moment. "I'm so sorry," she said finally. "I never wanted my life to make yours harder. It's not your fault. People are going to think what they want to think." Daniel rubbed his face with his free hand. "But I'd be lying if I said it didn't bother me. The idea that customers think I'm some kind of gold digger, that they're questioning my integrity because of who I'm with, it makes me feel sick." "What do you want to do?" It was the same question Gary had asked, but from Isabella it meant something different. She wasn't asking how to manage the situation. She was asking if Daniel wanted to continue managing it at all. "I don't want to lose you," Daniel said quietly, "but I also don't know how to keep doing this when it's affecting my ability to provide for Maya. If I lose my job because of gossip, we're in serious trouble." "You're not going to lose your job." Gary made that clear, this time. But what about next time, when it's not just one customer but several? What happens when the shop's reputation starts suffering because people associate me with scandal or whatever narrative they've created? Daniel felt frustration rising. "I can't afford to be a liability, Isabella. I don't have the luxury of not caring what people think." "So what are you saying, that we should end this?" The pain in her voice made Daniel's heart clench. "I don't know what I'm saying. I'm scared. Of losing my job, of not being able to take care of Maya, of having to choose between you and financial stability. What if you didn't have to choose? What if there was another option?" "Like what?" Isabella took a breath, and Daniel could almost hear her gathering courage. "Come work for me. Not at Meridian. That would create its own complications, but I've been thinking about something you said months ago, about wanting your own shop someday. What if we made that happen now?" Daniel sat up straighter, his heart starting to pound. "Isabella, hear me out. I'm not offering charity. I'm proposing a legitimate business investment. You have the skills, the work ethic, the integrity that would make a small independent shop successful. I have the capital to make it happen. We draw up a proper business plan, establish a formal partnership with clear terms, and build something that's yours. You can't just throw money at every problem I have." "I'm not throwing money at a problem. I'm investing in talent and potential. That's what I do, Daniel. I assess opportunities and decide where to allocate resources for the best return. You are a good investment. And if things don't work out between us personally, then what? We're stuck in a business partnership while trying to navigate a failed relationship? Then we act like adults and honor our business commitments regardless of our personal feelings." Isabella's voice was firm. "Daniel, I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm offering you a chance to build the career you've always wanted. What happens between us romantically is separate from the business opportunity. Can't you see that?" Daniel wanted to see it, wanted to believe that Isabella's offer was purely professional, that accepting wouldn't make him dependent on her in ways that would poison what they had. But the voice in his head that had learned through hard experience to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good kept whispering warnings. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "It's a huge decision, and I can't make it while I'm emotional and scared." "Of course, take all the time you need." Isabella paused. "But Daniel, Whether you accept the business offer or not, I need to know we're okay. I need to know you're not going to let other people's opinions push you away from me. I don't want to walk away from you, but you're considering it. I'm considering what's best for Maya. That's what I always have to consider first. And you think what is best for her is having a father who gave up on happiness because other people judged him for it? Isabella's voice had an edge now. Because from where I'm sitting, what's best for Maya is having a father who's fulfilled and loved and building a life he's proud of. She deserves to see you thriving, not just surviving. The words hit harder because they echoed things Sarah had said years ago, before she died. About Daniel settling for less than he deserved, about teaching Maya to dream small because that felt safer. He'd dismissed Sarah's concerns then, told himself that stability mattered more than ambition. Now here was Isabella saying the same things, and Daniel couldn't ignore them as easily. I'll think about it, he promised, about all of it. Just give me a few days. They said goodnight with a tension that hadn't existed between them in months, and Daniel lay awake that night staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine different futures. There was the safe path: keep working at Morrison's, deal with the gossip until it died down, maintain the status quo. And there was the terrifying path: accept Isabella's investment, build something of his own, risk everything on the belief that he was capable of more. The decision consumed him for the next 3 days. He made lists of pros and cons. He calculated and recalculated numbers until they blurred together. He talked to his sister, who told him he'd be an idiot to turn down the opportunity. He even talked to Jenkins, who'd worked at Morrison's for 30 years and admitted he sometimes wondered what his life would have looked like if he'd had the courage to strike out on his own. Fear keeps you safe, Jenkins said over beers after a shift. But it also keeps you stuck. You gotta decide which matters more, safety or growth. On the 4th day, Daniel called Isabella and asked if they could meet to discuss the business proposal properly. They met at a coffee shop halfway between her office and his apartment, neutral territory that felt appropriate for what needed to be a professional conversation. Isabella arrived with a folder full of documents, market analysis, projected budgets, potential locations for a shop. She'd clearly been working on this for longer than just the past few days, and the level of detail was both impressive and slightly overwhelming. I've been thinking about this since you mentioned wanting your own shop, Isabella explained as she walked Daniel through the materials. Not because I was planning to spring it on you, but because I like solving problems, and I thought this one was interesting. When you told me about the situation at Morrison's, it seemed like the right time to present it. The business plan was solid. More than solid. It was brilliant, actually, accounting for startup costs and operating expenses and realistic revenue projections based on the local market. Isabella was proposing a 60-40 partnership split, with her holding the 60% stake in exchange for providing the capital investment. Daniel would manage all day-to-day operations and have final say on hiring, customer service policies, and quality standards. Why 60-40 instead of 50-50? Daniel asked, studying the paperwork. Because I'm providing the financial resources and taking on the larger risk. If the business fails, I lose money, but you lose your livelihood. That imbalance needs to be reflected in the ownership structure. Isabella met his eyes steadily. But this isn't a charity arrangement, Daniel. I expect a return on my investment. I expect you to work your ass off to make this successful. And if you don't, I'll exercise my majority stake to make changes. This is a business partnership with all the accountability that entails. Her directness was oddly reassuring. This wasn't pity or romantic grand gesture. It was a legitimate business proposal from someone who believed in his abilities enough to back them with serious money. What happens if we break up? Daniel asked bluntly. Not saying we will, but we need to address the elephant in the room. Then we maintain our professional relationship and honor the business agreement we've made. We're both adults capable of separating personal feelings from professional obligations. Isabella pulled out another document. But if you want additional protection, we can include clauses that allow you to buy me out over time if the relationship ends. It would take years to accomplish given your current financial situation, but it would give you a path to full ownership regardless of what happens romantically. Daniel read through the proposed buyout terms, his mind spinning. Everything Isabella was suggesting was fair, maybe more than fair. She was offering him an opportunity to build something meaningful while protecting both parties and maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. The question wasn't whether the deal was good, it clearly was, The question was whether Daniel had the courage to accept it. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel set down the paperwork and looked at Isabella directly. "Be completely honest. Are you offering this because you love me and want to help me, or because you genuinely believe I can make this business successful?" "Both." Isabella didn't hesitate. "I love you and I want to see you thrive, but I'm also a businesswoman who's built a career on making smart investments. I wouldn't offer this if I didn't genuinely believe you have the skills and work ethic to make it profitable. My feelings for you opened my eyes to the opportunity, but the business case stands on its own merits." Daniel sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was it. The chance to build the life he'd always wanted, to show Maya that dreams were worth pursuing even when they were scary. All he had to do was be brave enough to accept it. "Okay," he said, and heard his voice shake slightly. "Let's do it. Let's build a shop." Isabella's smile was radiant. "Yeah? Yeah, I'm terrified, and I'll probably have panic attacks at 3 in the morning, worrying about whether I made a huge mistake. But yes, I want to do this." They spent the next 2 hours going through details, timelines, location scouting, equipment needs, hiring plans. By the time they left the coffee shop, Daniel's head was spinning with possibilities and logistics and the surreal awareness that his life was about to change dramatically. He gave Morrison's his 2-week notice the next day. Gary took it better than expected, actually seeming pleased that Daniel was pursuing something bigger. "Knew you had it in you," Gary said, shaking Daniel's hand. "You're too talented to spend your whole career doing oil changes and brake jobs. Go build something great." The next 3 months were a blur of activity. They found a location, a small commercial space in a good neighborhood with enough room for 4 bays and a modest customer waiting area. Isabella handled the legal and financial paperwork, while Daniel focused on equipment procurement and setup. He interviewed mechanics, eventually hiring 2 guys he'd known from Morrison's who were excited about joining a new venture. He established relationships with parts suppliers, designed a logo, set up a website. Maya was deeply involved in every decision, offering opinions on paint colors and furniture choices with the seriousness of a board member. When Daniel asked what they should name the shop, she thought for approximately 3 seconds before announcing, "Harper's. Because we're Harper's, and that means we're honest, and we work hard." So Harper's Automotive it became, with a logo featuring clean lines and professional typography that Isabella's marketing team had helped design. The name felt right, personal without being cutesy, professional without being generic. It was a statement. This was a family business built on integrity. The grand opening was scheduled for early May, right after Maya's 7th birthday. The weeks leading up to it were chaotic and stressful and occasionally terrifying. Daniel lay awake at night mentally running through everything that could go wrong. Equipment failures, lack of customers, financial disaster. But every time the fear threatened to overwhelm him, he thought about what Jenkins had said about choosing growth over safety. Isabella was a steady presence throughout, offering advice when asked, but mostly letting Daniel run things his way. She showed up for the final walkthrough the day before opening, admiring the clean bays and organized tools and the small waiting area that Maya had helped decorate with plants and comfortable chairs. "You built this," Isabella said, standing in the middle of the shop and looking around with visible pride. "This is all you, Daniel. Your vision, your standards, your dream made real. I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have, eventually. I just accelerated the timeline." Isabella turned to face him. "But I'm glad I got to be part of it. Watching you build this, seeing you come alive with purpose and excitement, it's been incredible." Daniel pulled her close, kissing her in the middle of his empty shop and feeling gratitude wash over him. "Thank you for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." Opening day brought more customers than Daniel had dared hope for. Word had spread about the new shop run by Morrison's former lead mechanic, and people who'd trusted Daniel's work before were willing to give the new venture a try. The fact that he was dating Isabella Vaughn probably didn't hurt either. It turned out that some of the notoriety could actually work in his favor, creating name recognition and curiosity that brought people through the door. What kept them coming back was the quality of work. Daniel had built Harper's Automotive on the same principles he'd tried to live his whole life by: honesty, integrity, transparency. He explained repairs in plain language. never recommended unnecessary services, stood behind his work with guarantees. Within 2 months, they had a loyal customer base and were booking out a week in advance. The business success brought its own challenges. Daniel was working longer hours than he had at Morrison's, carrying the stress of being an owner rather than just an employee. There were payrolls to meet, insurance premiums to pay, equipment maintenance to manage. Some days the responsibility felt crushing, and he'd wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. But then he'd have a morning where he walked into his own shop, looked at the sign bearing his family name, and felt pride settle into his bones. Or a customer would thank him for his honesty, saying they'd been to 3 other mechanics who tried to upsell them on unnecessary repairs before Daniel gave them a fair assessment. Or Maya would tell her class that her daddy owned his own business, and you could hear the pride in her voice that made every sleepless night worthwhile. His relationship with Isabella evolved too, deepening with the shared experience of building something together. They navigated the boundaries between personal and professional with careful attention, maintaining separate spheres while supporting each other's endeavors. Isabella taught Daniel about business strategy and financial planning. Daniel helped Isabella reconnect with the hands-on automotive work that had first drawn her to the industry, before corporate leadership had pulled her away from the mechanical side of things. They still faced scrutiny and judgment. Articles still got written, gossip still circulated. People still had opinions about the CEO dating a mechanic. But as the months passed and Harper's Automotive established itself as a reputable business, the narrative slowly shifted. Instead of gold digger and scandal, people started talking about savvy business partnership and mutual success. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The real turning point came almost a year after that grocery store parking lot encounter. Daniel had just finished a particularly challenging repair on a vintage Mustang when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something made him answer. "Mr. Harper? This is Martin Chen from Metro Business Journal. I'm writing a feature on successful small businesses in the area, and Harper's Automotive came highly recommended. Would you be willing to be interviewed?" The article ran 2 weeks later, a full-page spread with photos of the shop and a lengthy interview where Daniel talked about his philosophy of honest service and fair pricing. There was exactly 1 paragraph mentioning his relationship with Isabella, framed not as scandal, but as an example of how their respective expertise in automotive work complemented each other. Daniel hadn't realized how much the negative press had been weighing on him until he saw himself represented positively in print. This wasn't a gossip piece questioning his motivations. It was legitimate business journalism recognizing his accomplishments. He showed the article to Maya that evening, and she insisted on cutting it out to hang on her wall next to her drawings and school certificates. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she said with 7-year-old solemnity. "You made something really good." That night, after Maya was asleep, Daniel sat on his couch and thought about the journey that had brought him here. A scratched car. A decision to be honest instead of running away. A woman who'd offered grace when she could have demanded payment. A relationship built on mutual respect and genuine care despite vastly different circumstances. It hadn't been easy. There had been fights and misunderstandings, public scrutiny and private doubts. There had been moments when walking away would have been simpler, safer, less complicated. But they'd chosen differently. They'd chosen honesty over convenience, courage over fear, possibility over certainty. And in doing so, they'd built something real, not just a business or a relationship, but a life that felt whole in ways Daniel hadn't experienced since Sarah died. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Saw the article? I'm so proud of you. Dinner at my place this weekend to celebrate?" Daniel smiled and typed back, "Actually, I was thinking we could have it at my place this time. I want to cook for you." "You're going to cook? Should I be worried?" "Only a little, but I promise it'll be made with love, even if it's not technically edible." "Perfect. Can't wait." Daniel set down his phone and looked around his modest apartment. The worn couch, the wobbly coffee table, the small kitchen where he'd figure out how to make something that wouldn't poison the woman he loved. It wasn't much compared to Isabella's sprawling house, but it was his. And increasingly, it was becoming theirs too, a space where Isabella was learning to feel comfortable and welcome. They were blending their lives slowly, carefully, with awareness of the complexities involved. Isabella had started keeping clothes at Daniel's apartment. Daniel had a designated workspace at Isabella's house for when he needed to do paperwork in the evenings. Maya had bedrooms in both places, decorated to her specifications with art supplies and books and the stuffed elephant that had started everything. They were becoming a family, not in the traditional sense, but in the way that mattered. People choosing each other daily, building a life together through small acts of care and commitment. 2 years after that first encounter in the parking lot, Daniel stood in his shop on a quiet Saturday afternoon, looking at the schedule for the following week. Every time slot was booked. The business was thriving, exceeding even Isabella's optimistic projections. He'd hired 2 more mechanics and was considering expanding into the adjacent commercial space that had recently become available. Maya was 9 now, confident and articulate, doing well in school, and still convinced that Isabella needed to get a dog named Pancake. Isabella had actually started seriously considering it, visiting animal shelters on weekends and sending Daniel photos of golden retrievers that met Maya's specifications. The gossip had never entirely disappeared, but it had faded to background noise that Daniel had learned to ignore. People would always have opinions. What mattered was the life they were actually living, not the story others told about it. Daniel's phone rang, and he answered to hear Isabella's voice, slightly breathless with excitement. "Are you sitting down?" "Should I be?" "The merger went through, the one we've been negotiating for 18 months. It's done. Signed this morning." As Isabella's joy was palpable through the phone line. "This is huge, Daniel. This changes everything for Meridian, positions us as a major player in sustainable automotive technology." "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without your support. All those late nights when I was stressed and doubting myself, and you just listened and reminded me why I was fighting for this. That mattered. You matter." "So do you, more than you know." "I love you, Daniel Harper." "I love you too, Isabella Vaughn." They made plans to celebrate that evening, dinner at the Italian place Maya loved, followed by a movie she'd been begging to see. Simple, domestic, perfect. The kind of evening that had become their normal, built on the foundation of that first honest choice in a parking lot. Later, lying in bed after Maya had fallen asleep and Isabella had gone home to prepare for an early morning meeting, Daniel thought about the unexpected path his life had taken. He'd started with nothing but a scratched car and a decision to do the right thing. He'd stumbled through fear and pride and the messy work of building connection across vast differences. And somehow, through honesty and courage and the willingness to keep showing up even when it was hard, he'd found not just love, but a life that felt rich with purpose and possibility. The scratch on Isabella's car had been repaired long ago, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. But the connection it had created kept growing, kept deepening, kept proving that sometimes the smallest moments of integrity could transform everything. Daniel fell asleep that night with gratitude settling warm in his chest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, and that he'd face them all with the same principle that had guided him from the beginning: honesty. Even when it costs you everything, even when it asks everything of you, even when you're terrified of what comes next. Because choosing truth over convenience, courage over fear, love over safety, that was what built lives worth living. That was what turned mistakes into opportunities and strangers into family and ordinary days into something that felt remarkably like happiness. And in the end, that was worth every scratch, every struggle, every moment of doubt that had brought him here.